It's a very different episode today. It's a crossover episode, but before I let Keith, the host of Couch Command, the podcast that we're crossing over with, take the wheel, so to speak, I'm just going to quickly give you guys the translated Chinese fiction news, the TrChFic news. So we have 3 news items today. Here's the first one. If you're bored in lockdown, here's a virtual event you can attend. It's about the author Feng Jicai and his book Faces in the Crowd that we covered on the podcast. So the event's called Tales of Old Tianjin, and it's hosted by Xinran, quite a well-known author, well, in Chinese and in Chinese in translation. Xinran, if you're a fan of Chinese lit, I'm sure you will have heard of her. So Xinran, the Guanghua Bookshop, which is an amazing Chinese bookshop in London's Chinatown, and Sinuous Books, the publisher who published Faces in the Crowd. I'm not going to read the whole about the event because it's a massive, it's quite a few paragraphs. But basically it's an online event. I believe it's free to attend. And yeah, I'll put a link to that Eventbrite page in the show notes, but please do check that out. Okay, there's the end of our first news segment. News segment number 2. It's an article this time, and it's shared on a really good website, Radi China, and it's from former show guest Dylan Levi King. He's a translator, so he knows what he's talking about. The headline is, "What's Going Wrong with Chinese Literature and Translation?" and the little subheading, "Chinese readers are often buying entirely different books to international readers of Chinese fiction. What's going on?" And basically the thing jumps off by looking at how the list of the best Chinese fiction on Douban for 2019 has only one author in common with the books that came out in English translation. And he kind of goes on to say that a lot of the Chinese lit in translation that's coming out is about 20 years behind the original publications. The Chinese authors are getting put into English these days by Western publishers are mostly older authors, and the book that caught the most attention this past year has been Fang Fang's Wuhan Diary, and that's obviously got attention for its political/geopolitical buzz and significance, rather than its literary merits, if we're being honest. So he kind of talks about that. It's a very good read, it's very balanced, and if you have thoughts about it after reading it, you should at Dylan on Twitter. I'm sure if you're polite, he will respond. Last one. Now this is something that popped up when I opened Twitter, my least favourite website that I can't stop talking about. I opened it up this morning, and pinging in front of my eyes was someone who'd retweeted some article on ufology with Chinese characteristics and the fate of Chinese socialism. I read this one in a half-awake daze, frantically drinking coffee so that my brain would power up fast enough to get through all the kind of... it deals with the kind of amazing fusion of traditional culture and official Communist Party speak that is, I think, unique to China, and UFOs as well. I really need to reread it, but if you are looking for something surreal written in formal language, check this article out. I will put it in the show notes. Okay, that is the TrChFic news done with. Without further ado, bang, let's get on with this takeover. Let's listen to my interview with Keith. So I'm on the show with Keith Justice Hayward. Keith, it's great to have you on. How's your day going?
Pretty good, thank you. And I have with me Angus. We're doing kind of a dual podcast with my podcast, The Couch Command, and his podcast,
The Translated Chinese Fiction Podcast, which is more or less exactly what it sounds like. We don't translate Chinese fiction. We talk about Chinese fiction that has been translated into English.
And I am completely... I've only had one dance and with one author and his fan who did the fan fiction. So you were the professional on this. I'm pretty brand new as of I don't know. It was a several year journey to finish the books for me because I hadn't read books in years. Life just kind of changed around me because social media just devastates attention spans, and then there's so many options to do anything you want to at any moment for entertainment. The last time I was reading books was when I was riding the bus, and once I got a car, that brought into that. But yeah, like I'm not sure if you want me to just get going into how I got into the books, or where do you want to start?
I guess we should say precisely what book we're doing. So we're doing, slightly strangely, the third book in a trilogy. We're doing Death's End, which is the third book in Liu Cixin's Remembrance of Earth's Past trilogy, which is maybe more commonly known as the three-body problem, or even just three-body, which is probably what we'll be calling it this episode. And I have done Liu Cixin once on my own podcast before, but we just did one of his short stories. I've kind of avoided doing three-body. It felt like almost too obvious and something that a lot of podcasts have already covered. So it's nice to be coming at it in a kind of from its ending rather than from its start. It's hopefully we're doing something for the podcast listener out there who's listened to all the other three-body problem podcast episodes available online. Hopefully they're now looking for something a bit more niche, and they found us. That's what I'm kind of visualizing. So yeah,
and I urge you, if you're into science fiction, and like you were like I was, and you're kind of like dying for something new, don't listen to our podcast now. Don't spoil it for yourself. Like, it was such a freaking journey and fun to have it unfold before me. I did everything I could not to read anything about the plot synopsis, and a coworker spoiled it for me. But yeah, like going in completely like bare and raw, like not knowing what's going to happen. It's been one of like the most fun fictional experiences I've had in freaking years, since The Matrix, or maybe since Lord of the Rings trilogy.
Yeah. Yes, we are going to do spoilers on this one. So now with that out the way, Keith, can you tell us a wee bit about yourself and what the three-body problem, or this book in particular, Death's End, means to you?
Sure. Let's see. I came up a young boy in the city of Milwaukee. Much like other geeks, different from other people. Like boredom was a thing back in my day, so I had to find ways to have fun. Like around that era where I started reading more and more books, like my best friend had moved away, so like finally like I just kind of gave in. My sister gave me Choose Your Own Adventure books, and then like I just started going through all these other books, and yeah, the magic of books I'd almost forgotten. That how much they can take you to another world. And then yeah, like I've been a science fiction fan my entire life. Ever since I started being curious about anything, like my first love of astronomy came from a Snoopy encyclopedia, where like I was just reading about like what planets, what the dance, orbits, what like one of like my favorite things, which I'm not sure if it ever came to pass. But in the Snoopy book, it said that Pluto and Neptune were orbiting each other, so that I had the fun fact to pull on my mom and my dad that says, Pluto's the farthest one out. But not after this year, which I'm not sure if that ever happened. But yeah, it just led me up the ladder to the grand disappointment of Star Wars, actually, was what did it for me. Like, Star Wars was like kind of the first big thing that opened up like speculative fiction, where if this exists, then that exists. And then like you see the explosion of creativity and world building that happened from it. And the new ones were just, to my shock and horror, I saw just branding on the screen. I saw familiar images, and then like I was like, okay, F this. I need to find, and then like all these arguments popped up around it about like what science fiction was, what writing was, and people just had no appreciation or love for it. They didn't believe it existed. That writing that made sense was a thing. So then like I just had to go away from what was popular, and there was a article that said like Amazon offering $1 billion for three-body problem. I was like, what the hell? Because that never happens. Like, you don't get that kind of money for something no one's ever heard of. And that was like Chinese science fiction. Wait a second. I don't think I've ever heard of that, strangely. Like, it just made me start thinking more and more of like, okay, then how come I haven't heard of this? And what kind of fiction gets born from a society that, yeah, I guess I don't know much about them. And then, yeah, I opened those books, and I gotta say I was bored at first, but by Death's End, it kind of changed the way I see the universe. So That was
Yeah.
my experience.
Absolutely, it did kind of change my view of things as well, and maybe not as dramatically as it changed your view of the universe and what literature can do. We'll get more into that later in the episode. So you've talked to us a little bit about like how you got into the world of sci-fi and how these books kind of set you off as a reader. So do you in your reading habits, are you generally a sci-fi reader when you do read books, or was it really a one-off with this trilogy?
Yeah, almost. I'm pretty sure 100% of my reading has always been science fiction, and in that I include fantasy. Ever since I was a kid, when it comes to finding a book and just kind of getting away so that my mind can grow, I just loved finding books where you could tell the writer cared top to bottom about like the entire universe you're about to walk into, and then me and my friends had discussions about it, and then like you could tell different kinds of writers cared about different things. Some cared about more comedy, some were just doing a job, and yeah. So oddly enough, now that you mention it, like I don't know, I can't remember much that wasn't science fiction besides the YA novels about young boys trying to kiss tomboys when I was a kid. That's the length of like what I've read throughout my life.
Yeah, it occurred to me that like when thinking about sci-fi reading habits, do you know who the big inspirations for Liu Cixin were? Have you ever stumbled across this info?
I think I do. He had to have been influenced by Isaac Asimov with the Foundation series.
Yeah, I think the two I always hear that inspired most of China's sci-fi writers, the ones who are Liu Cixin's age and the younger generation, they've read a lot of American sci-fi authors, and I think the two biggies are Arthur C. Clarke and Asimov. So it's kind of funny that for you as an American, you're getting this heavily American influenced sci-fi, but it's coming to you. It's pinging back in a way from the other side of the world.
I love that concept and idea. Like while I was reading it, I'm just like, I guess I'd forgotten how much that was a part of our conversations back in the day, like when we were like reading comic books and watching Star Trek together. But like, so where did this come from? Like, or what influenced this person to do this? And then, yeah, like the idea of all these ideas I've been growing up with, incubating in a society that's cut off from me, was just like, the further I get into the books, the more I'm like, oh my god, yeah, like this person would have a different yet similar view of how I see things, and it was just kind of fun to see like how and I'm gonna mess up his name again, even though you just told me how to say it. Cixin,
Liu Cixin.
Leo
Cixin. Yeah, that.
Cixin.
If you're not bang on, like, people will still know what you're talking about.
Thanks. Yeah. Reading his books and like how he and I think similarly already, but we came from different worlds. But then he started awakening my mind to like just different perspectives. Was just exactly what I needed around that time.
And not to kind of lecture too much at you, but there are some really the first sci-fi that ever appeared in China. The story of how that came about is really interesting too, and it's also like a story of cultural exchange. You can read a wee bit about this, I think, if you pick up Ken Liu's anthology of translated Chinese sci-fi, Invisible Planets. There's one or two intro essays by some of the authors there that go into this a bit. But basically, long story short, the first sci-fi that came into China was translations of European works by this guy called Lu Xun, who I've covered on the show a couple of times, and his contemporaries. But then the sci-fi, so there was things like H.G. Wells, Jules Verne, kind of like adventure stories about the wonders of science. And this was seen by some of the kind of progressive intellectuals in China at the time as a way to kind of promote science in a country that desperately needed some scientific progress from their point of view. So even the very first Chinese sci-fi stories were kind of modeled on Western or foreign influences. So Whether people want to say sci-fi is a Western genre or not, that's one thing. But what the thing that me and you might find really interesting is in sci-fi in China has always kind of been about some kind of dialogue with the outside world, and now it's kind of turning into a back and forth rather than a one-way dialogue. And there's other influences that came, like Russian influences later after the revolution, but I'm not really an expert about that. But if anyone's curious about that, Xiajia's essay at the start of That Invisible Planets book is a really nice, neat little explanation of that. And I think you can read it online for free as well. It's called What Makes Chinese Science Fiction Chinese. I'll put a link to it in the show notes.
Looking forward to that. Yeah, there's... when I started finding out about how new this era of sci-fi is in China, it blew my mind because I had never... My entire universe has always seen sci-fi, so it kind of broke my brain to think about an entire civilization that doesn't think about sci-fi or didn't have it always in their... Like, every day of my life, somewhere on TV or somewhere around me, there's science fiction. So I was just kind of thinking, like, so what does a world look like without it? Or what does a mind look like without it? And then, like, also I saw that the guy who translated the books, or who translated the two books, Ken Liu?
Yeah, Ken Liu.
Yeah, like, he grew up not knowing about the West, and, like, the science fiction he read, he thought that's just what was out there. And that just blows my mind that he thought it was real. And yeah, I'm still blown away that, like, you know, what does that create in one's mind, and how they look at the universe, and like, why would their entire civilization not have science fiction and have to have it introduced like it was? Like, that just it's hard to imagine.
Yeah, I'd probably caveat and say it's not that it vanished in China under the more authoritarian communist periods, but rather it was only allowed to appear in certain forms. So, like in the Mao era, it was mostly used as like a educational tool for children. So, like fun stories about a rocket going to Mars or the moon or something. Then after Mao's death, the country kind of became a little bit more open, and people started writing sci-fi, like proper fiction stories for enjoyment. But then at a certain point in the 80s, when the country was opening up, the government pushed back. There was I forgot what their initiative was. It was the anti-spiritual pollution campaign, and that shut down the growth of the genre for years, and then it kind of re-emerged in the 90s. But there was also we were talking before we started recording about this book I'm going to do in a future episode called Cat Country from 1930. 1930 something. And that is also a bit of an oddity, because there was a period before the revolution where not much sci-fi was being written, and I only really learned the reason for that recently. So I mentioned earlier that when the first sci-fi was being translated and written in China, I guess that was around just after the turn of the 20th century, so when the last dynasty was about to be overthrown. But then, fast forward a decade or two, and the production of sci-fi kind of stopped. And I could be wrong here, but I think the reason for that was that the country was heading into quite dire straits. They were falling into a very unstable period with warlords on the rise, the start of Japanese invasion, and I guess the literary establishment, or the writers or whatever, kind of turned away from fantastical genres back to more realistic stuff. So, although it is crazy to think about a society with like no sci-fi, I'd probably say, like, on one hand, the first sci-fi started in China not very long after it got going in the West, in its origin point. But the windows where it didn't exist, it either did exist in certain forms that were permitted, but yeah, there were, I guess you could say it as like a popular genre that you could read for fun. Yeah, it just kind of, there's real historical and political reasons why that didn't happen. But Now,
That's
now I'm worried I'm
like I
being like a
said,
school
once again,
teacher again.
this brought to attention sharply, like how much I didn't know anything about China.
Mm.
So yeah, it's and also felt almost magical, even like yeah, the experience of the getting connected to a different mind like that, through things that we both love, was I don't know, I can't think of the word for it, but it was amazing.
It's like a lot of things I find about China. It's just too big to get your head around in one sentence. You have
Yeah.
to-
Yeah, engaging with it as I was just like I was in love with like how non-Western white person centric it was. Like I never read books like that. I never read books where it's not uh, an East European type civilization that is the fulcrum that will change everything. And yeah, it just this is a fantastically different path to get into science fiction, and with its multiple layers of meaning and philosophy. The philosophy was amazing. I never get to really like philosophy is also another thing that like has always been a part of my universe in life, and like you get it somewhat in the fantasy books that I've read, and there's good lessons here and there, but once I had done the full trilogy of A Three-Body Problem, I felt like I had like gone through a ginormous like philosophical lesson that has definitely influenced how I've been approaching astronomy, politics, and my own personal philosophy has changed because of the books. So,
So we've been talking a lot about being set down new roads and also making contact with new things. So I think you kind of touched on this already, but just so I'm clear, because I'm a nosy person, how did you first make contact with the three body problem? Like, how did you learn about it, and then how did you get the book into your hands?
so the first contact was just the devastation. Like I can't on my podcast, Couch Command. Me and my friends, I'm going to take them through a pretty great journey of like reminding ourselves why we loved Star Wars, and it's been kind of beautiful the devastation I've seen the new movies inflict upon people who once loved it. Like like myself and my good friends are genuinely heartbroken and in mourning for what they saw. And it something I noticed back then was like that level of destruction creates, and that I could start seeing it on YouTube and whatnot, and like in my own mind and heart, where I was just like, look, I love this stuff, and I'm not going to stop. And like I guess you chose to do like a metaphor vision of like myself going on like an intergalactic journey where I had to leave Star Wars behind and venture off into the black and see something unknown, and like see if what I once loved really existed. So then I kind of went on like a almost a mystery hunt, where the first hint was Amazon wants to buy Three Body Problem for $1 billion, and that made no sense. You don't spend $1 billion on a book series that you haven't been seeing on Good Morning America or whatnot for a couple of years. So I had to find out, what is this? So yeah, for the first time in many years, I was like, I ordered the book off Amazon, and I made sure not to read the back of it. I just started reading through it and just like letting my mind be taken on this like weird freaking journey of like cultural evolution. What the hell is that? Oh my god, murder, Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Wait, and then like reading the books, I'm just like, when does the science fiction kick in? I'm massively curious as to, like, I have to admit I was bored at the start, but it kept me going no matter what, because like $1 billion for some guys feeling depression, $1 billion for a history lesson, and how could aliens even factor into this? Taken into depths where Yi Wenji, is that her name?
Yeah, Wenjie.
Yeah, Wenjie.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. Sitting in the depths of that station with her, I felt it like this cold, lonely, drawn out depression of like feeling like I'm in a college library, not sure what I'm studying for, and then bing, do not answer, do not answer. I was shocked. And I'm like the first hint of science fiction that like really cracked in. And I'm like, what? That would be the first. Wait, why? And then yeah, it just took me down the well where I was like reading while camping, going, why are these people deflating in a VR? What is happening? But yeah, like such a slow burn. And it makes you earn it. Like, well, like there's a guy who keeps on seeing the countdown on all the pictures, and one of the things I was thinking was like, oh, this is gonna be like a Western bullshit where, like, you know, it's shocking, but the visual, that's all you need. Like, new Star Wars is like the visual itself, and we're gonna stop there. But then, I felt that the writer was more intelligent than that, and it took like conversations beyond the third book to figure out like that he was seeing a projection from a sophon, and I'm just like, oh my god, like the detail, the care of like how things connect and work together. It was just it rewoke what I loved about fiction, science fiction, reminded me that writing was such a skill that I once loved. And yeah, I'm now rambling over the place, but it was a fun personal discovery for me where no one else was talking about it. There wasn't news. There wasn't an announcement. It was just me alone clicking across the internet going, all right, let's see if I can uncover this mystery. And yeah, I got to unfold the mystery and then all of a sudden make friends with geeks in China, which like I hope this gets listened to by the geek population of China, because I guess I've always had like a weird connection to them where like I did a website called hinchinjustice.com, and I had a podcast on there where we talked about live action Japanese science fiction a lot. It was called HJU Radio, and like whenever I'd look at the stats, I'm like, why are there thousands of people in China listening to me? Like, what is that connection there? And like, yeah, going down the depths of Three Body Problem, like, they care about the weirdness and darkness as much as any of us, and it's just been fun to connect across the language barrier on stuff we all love.
Yeah, totally. A thing that surprised me when I moved to China, but obviously with hindsight, it shouldn't have been surprising, was how much like Japanophilia there is there, at least for like pop culture wise. They consume quite a lot of stuff like that in China. And
I had no idea.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, you wouldn't think until you know, and then once you know, you're like, oh yeah, of course, makes so much sense. But yeah, the thing about seeing the stats from China is that's amusing, because the place I host this podcast now is Podbean. I used to use SoundCloud, and I believe they're both blocked inside China, which means anyone accessing, listening to the podcast from inside the PRC is doing it with a VPN, which means they'll be showing up in my stats as being from another country. So they've always kind of been like an invisible part of the listening stats. So
cool.
I would never know, like, probably most of them are connecting to servers in like Japan, Korea, or America, probably mostly America, or Hong Kong even. And I would just be guessing how many of these listeners were from China. But actually, there's a thing I can plug here. You might find this interesting if you want to make more sci-fi friends across the world or from inside China. I've had one of the people from this organization on as a guest on the show before when we looked at Folding Beijing by Hao Jingfang. I attend the meetings of this group called the London Chinese Sci-Fi Group. And ever since lockdown, their meetings have been virtual, which is why I've been able to attend, because I'm not in London. But every month or so, they do like a sort of a reading group book club thing on a Chinese sci-fi short story. It's always been a short story in the times I've virtually attended. But recently, they started having authors on as guests. So just 4 hours before I got on the line with you, Keith, I was in a Zoom call with a load of nerds, Chinese sci-fi loving nerds from around the world. Plenty of them from China or the Chinese diaspora. But the the special guest was Bao Shu, the author of Redemption of Time. I was just talking to him a few hours ago.
Oh my god!
Yeah,
I can't even. I love how mysterious he is to me. I have no idea what he looks like. And Bao Shu, that's not his real name, right?
yeah, that's his pen name. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't imagine what that would be like. Does he speak English?
He's got really good English. He's out of all the guests, like the Chinese sci-fi writers they've had attending, he's been the only one who could like communicate entirely in English. Everyone else has been a little bit bilingual or speaking in Chinese, and then the host Guan Zhao has been like interpreting.
His book Redemption of Time was fire. Oh my god. Yeah. I was expecting Three Body Problem Light, which it kind of was. But it was fun. When I joined the Three Body Problem group that we have on Facebook, and like just seeing other Chinese geek fan reactions, where one guy took one picture of him holding it, and the next picture was the book in the trash. I was dying laughing, and I can see why. Like it goes away from the hard science and becomes more of a Green Lantern story. But I had so much fun with it, and it made me better understand this thing where people say opposites are the same and they create each other. And the way he explained like the dimensional fracturing of the universe made me think about how, yes, we're all part of the same tapestry, and then like the ripples create other, dimensions underneath it, such as like, once again, I sorry to keep bringing it up, the destruction of Star Wars created this deep love for it I've never seen happen before. So yeah, Bao Shu, like I'm intimidated to ever cross his path.
That was the other thing I was meaning to say. So you've mentioned plenty times that feeling that you'd lost Star Wars set you down looking for something to kind of fill the hole, or maybe that's the wrong way of looking at it, but it left you looking for something, and the thing you found was another trilogy, Three Body. And I was just thinking, like, out of films, as an individual, and thinking about like pop culture in general, there's plenty of like one-off novels and one-off films I've enjoyed, and there's plenty of one-off novels and one-off films that lots of people love and are even cult favorites. But there's something about series, maybe especially trilogies, and especially ones that exist across lots of different media, like the one that springs immediately to mind is Harry Potter. They've got some magic to them that like a one-off could just never have. So when you say that like you had this losing Star Wars wasn't just like losing 3 individual films, it was like losing something that made you need a replacement, and then the replacement you found was another trilogy. It doesn't, like, from like trying to look at it rationally, it doesn't seem like it would make sense, but on a non-rational level, it's like, yes, of course you would find another trilogy, because trilogies are like the magic form.
Yeah, there's like I've been on like a journey still about like the heart and like the source of creativity and what makes these things that last. Because there's movies like the Fifth Element, and then like when it came out, people were like, it's kind of like Star Wars. I'm like, no, it's not. It's like I'm trying to put my finger on what is it that people don't get, or what is it that happens where like you do Star Wars and like you can't help but think about the entire world of it. Like one movie had us thinking about it for the rest of our lives, where if this, then that, and then like it just builds upon itself, and like that was the fun of it. Like it wasn't always like, Luke Skywalker wasn't the greatest. Luke Skywalker was a dude who, as a result of like spaceships existing, teachers existing, he grew into a Jedi, and just like a working world means so much. So then, like, when, like, the toxic conversation happened around it, which was, like, the defenders of it, which people don't talk enough about, it was horrific. The fun geek conversations where me and my friends talk about, like, the building blocks and the puzzle pieces of what makes a world fell away to, you say you like it, if you're a good person, and then manipulating the conversations around that so that you weren't talking about the pieces, but making sure you form your opinion in a way that says you like it to prove your virtue. And then, and like, they devastated, like, I try to talk about, like, no, like, that's not how things work. That's not how the speed of a Star Destroyer works. That's not how training works. What's going on here? And, like, they're all, like, there's like, these memes, like, none of that ever existed. Like, you thinking you're world building, these pieces connecting, that's all just for children, and it never existed, and blah, blah, blah. And, just people and memes were just slamming on that. And I was like, I don't believe, I think everyone's wrong. I think that the majority of people are wrong. And I went to seek it out. Someplace where there wasn't a conversation that dictated what you had to feel about it or think about it. And then, yeah, like, through the three-body problem universe, once it gets going, because of this exists, and then you can't stop thinking about how their universe works, of, like, being hidden, the limitations of the speed of light and what problems and horrors that can cause, how it can affect you psychologically. And then I hit that, tripped over an insight while I was reading it, where, like, oh wow, wait a second, this hits more layers than I'm usually used to. Like, the perception of teaching, like, you're standing on a planet and suddenly it's on fire and you don't know why. That metaphor just applies to everything. And how much it taught me about, like, my own life, like, tragedies that have hit me hard, and they seem to have come out of nowhere. But then, like, yeah, if you look up at the sky and you see, like, a distant star that you've never seen before, if you understand how the world works, you start understanding, like, where tragedies come from, why you should prepare for them, and how someday, eventually, one will be beyond your imagination. And yeah, I just learned so much from those books. So, yeah, once again, I'm not sure if I'm rambling directionlessly or not, but yeah.
No, it shows that the things affected you, and that's the most important thing a book can do to someone, I think. I can definitely... I've never been a huge... what am I trying to say? I've never been incredibly so invested in, like, the world of a fantasy novel that I would get as let me start again. How can I say this? Yeah, while I've never been as kind of into a fan culture that it could like, that if it became turbulent it would throw me off. I've never been like that, but I can feel some of your frustrations about things you enjoy being wrapped up in culture wars. You know, I'm sure a lot of people listening know exactly what you mean. But and these things dominate the entire way that a work of art or media is framed. And if you try and express a view or an opinion that is completely technical and isn't on one side of the culture war, you'll be dismissed and shoved over to one side. And yeah, it's incredibly, like, sad to see conversations get reduced to, like, one team versus the other, and the actual enjoyment of the work is sidelined. It's sad.
It was... I had never seen anything like it before, actually. It was part of my fun fiction... not fun fiction, but the metaphor of how I was engaging with it, where my conversations at I'll Reveal were almost martial art. When, like, the first wave of, like, just devastating conversations, I got just attacked, like, over and over on Facebook about, like, you know, my stance on, like, what I think of women, and I've never been questioned on it before, because it's, you know, it should be obvious everyone's equal, but, like, it just came like a tidal wave, and, like, I was confused. So then, like, you know, all the lessons I've learned from martial arts was, like, you do a strike to see the person's soul and how they block, and then you work through that like a riddle to figure out, like, what is the answer to this conversation. So then, like, if there would be times where I started noticing, like, you know, I get to the point where, no, like, Star Wars is always equal. Like, Leia was leader of the team. Wait, you don't notice that? You don't know what I'm talking about. I was sitting around and yeah, it eventually just kind of woke up that the level of where I engage on fiction and care about the details and how things interact and interlace, apparently lots of people don't do that at all. They just use it as a medium to express their moral standing versus like the technique of what it takes to make a story that tells a lesson in interconnecting scenes that make sense to make a bigger picture so that you continue to think and care about it beyond once it's over. Like The Last Jedi, directed by one of my favorite writers and directors of all time, was garbage. I couldn't believe it. Like, and it made me question, wait, do all writers fake it this hard? And then, yeah, then it just like through Susan Leo, I always fuck it up. And I hope it's okay to curse.
Leo, they should both be alright.
Okay. Yeah, he reminded me like, no, you did not, it was not an illusion.
Oh, Cixin. I thought you were talking about someone called Susan. Sorry. Yeah, Cixin Leo, the old Cixin.
Susan Liu. No. But yeah, it was a Mr. Miyagi class I went through 3-Body Problem where you're waxing on and waxing off and like you're doing it for a long time. It's kind of, I don't know, I got a little bored with like this virtual world that didn't make sense until you get to the final lesson of this is what you've been learning all this time. The power of perspective. I'm like, oh my God. And then it just exponentially grew and turned into a prism of insights while reading the book. And Baoshu slammed the spike home with his final book and lessons on endings. So, yeah. What a freaking journey.
Yeah. We'll get onto a little bit more about what I'm about to mention might mean later in the episode, but what you were saying about the futility of trying to engage in some of those conversations reminds me a lot of the bit in 3-Body you mentioned where Yao Wenjie receives that message that says just don't respond. And I have to think, like, whenever I'm sitting on Twitter seeing all the various people, the various shades of opinion with all their hot takes, and the little bit of my brain that wants the dopamine hit and to get likes or to shake my little virtual fist is itching to type up my own grumpy, snarky opinion. And I remember, like, well, what purpose will this serve? It would be so much better for me and everyone else involved if I just go and read and enjoy something instead of broadcasting my reactions, not even like thoughts, but just reactions across the internet. It does no good.
I went through the same thing. Once I finally learned about the dark forest nature of the universe, it made me think about the internet. How it's in the 3-Body Problem universe, it's impossible to it's impossible to really connect with someone so distant from you because of like each civilization gets formed by their own stars. The way Earth, we know there's a sun rising and falling at the same hours every day, and that causes more of like a belief system of rising and falling, but the sun will always come out, versus like another civilization who knows unpredictable chaos and what kind of a person or civilization that can create. And then like you just don't know, like from the distance of the speed of light or the distance of like the internet, like the person saying that I don't like Rey because she's woman. This person has grown up underneath devastating stars and gravity that have like ravaged their life so that they do see the world like that. Like that's how they engage, that's how they try to survive. But that does, and like then I try to interact with that person from like, women and men being equal has always been is not even like a debate for me. My sister beat that into me until I cried. So it's just never been a question. So like the answer's always there. But yeah, like the distance of light speed, the distance of a person from another person, a mind to another mind, a planet to another planet. Like, you will never know what it's like to grow up underneath that person's star. And also, if you reveal your location to people who are in situations different than yours, they will freaking try to destroy you because they feel like the resources of ideas are finite, and they feel panic need to smash yours down to make sure that they don't lose any ground without giving thought of who they're attacking. So yeah, like I while I was going through it, I didn't know what the fuck was going on. I was like, why are people doing this? Why is the world a horrific place like this right now? And then yeah, the Three Body Problem books gave me the kung fu philosophy lesson of, like, on top of the mountain, this is what you're encountering, Keith. This is how it happens, and this is kind of how you can handle it. So yeah, it just taught me about interacting with humanity even.
Yeah, it's a funny kind of contradiction because in these books and present this worldview that is so pessimistic about different groups ever being able to understand each other and cooperate. It's generally very pessimistic about any positive things coming out of interactions between you and the other, you and the thing or person who's different. And yet it's contradicted by the fact that the series is such a success story in cultural exchange. It's what's brought Chinese sci-fi to the West. So we might get more into this sort of stuff later, but I think we should probably move on with our chat onto like the spoiler zone, and talk a little bit about the series as a whole, just so it's clear what we're talking about, and that should enable us to get into some of the other themes. So I'm going to attempt to summarize the whole trilogy here, and if you think I've missed anything key, please jump in at the end or even as I'm going through. And yeah, obviously, if you guys are listening and you don't want anything spoiled, this is the time to find another podcast, because we're about to spoil the whole thing. But yeah, so we start off in the Cultural Revolution. We're following a young lady called Ye Wenjie, and she is assigned to a station that the Chinese military, the People's Liberation Army, is running. And they are trying to broadcast their message into space, so that basically Maoism will be the first human ideology that reaches alien life. And she's sitting at her desk, she's feeling very dispirited, and she receives a message from another civilization. She's warned not to respond to them by the message she's receiving, but she does, and that triggers this alien civilization, the TrChFic, to basically come for Earth because their own world is uninhabitable, long story short. And we find out that in the present day there's a conspiracy. There's a group of humans who are working in secret with the TrChFic, preparing the world for their takeover. That conspiracy is overturned, and that's the end of book 1. In book 2, humanity's got about 500 years, I think, to get ready.
I think it's 400.
400.
Not to split hairs.
Oh, well, please do. They've got 400 years to get ready, and they build a great big fleet. The fleet is wrecked in one of the most amazing set-piece things anyone's ever going to read, and it'll be interesting to see when this thing gets made on Netflix, how they do that, if it'll be a success or not. But anyway, the human fleet gets wrecked. It looks like it's game over, but the character we're following in book 2, whose name is Luo Ji, he figures out this way the universe works that Liu Cixin has devised, called the Dark Forest theory, where basically you must not let any civilization anywhere in the galaxy know where you are, because they will take you out immediately so that you don't become a threat later. And he uses the threat of broadcasting the location of the TrChFic fleet and Earth as sort of like a mutually assured destruction. It's called like a deterrence system or something. Mm-hmm. And that saves Earth for the time being. Then we get to book 3, and this is where the series, which has already got pretty complicated, just exponentially gets bigger, and this is where you're probably going to need to help me out.
Right.
In fact, do you want to take over here? Because I think I'm going to mess it up.
I will definitely mess it up. like yeah, I'll definitely be messing it up. So I can try to follow along with you. Like my brain says that it starts with a young lady in like the Roman era or something like that.
Oh yeah, the fall of Constantinople. The Turkish Ottoman Turks are coming to destroy the very last remnant of what was once the Roman Empire.
But she knows of was it dimensional fractures that allow her to cast what she feels are spells, but what she's just doing is actually just affecting the normal universe. It's always there, but through different places that people don't know are there.
Yeah, I think that's it.
Then it leads on to Tian Ming.
Yep.
Did I say his name right?
Yep. Yun Tian Ming.
God bless his heart. Him and his love of a woman, but then he gets hit with a terminal disease. The woman comes back around to him and says, "Yeah, you're dying." So, and he's like, "Oh my God, she loves me." He's like, "No, can I use your brain?" And he's like, fine, fuck it, throw my brain at some aliens." And they do, and then this creates like a different connection as they start to understand or try to understand our fiction and our ways of thinking and creation. That if we don't listen to Bao Shu, makes it so that their civilization starts creating multi-dimensional fiction that comes back to us. And now I'm getting lost. So where would you go next in the story?
Yeah, so we have like a period of cultural exchange between the Trisolarians and Earth. It's like a golden age. Maybe something that gives us an idea of how Liu Cixin thinks. Mankind becomes very kind of effete. Men become more feminine. I think that's a big insight into how his mind works. And basically, humanity, things are too easy for humanity. We get lax. Logi passes on the torch as the guy who has like his finger on the proverbial deterrence button to this young lady.
And I thought it was interesting. He turns Logi into a stereotypical, or from my point of view, stereotypical kung fu looking master.
Yes.
Fu Manchu mustache and like robes. I'm like, okay, I love that he did this because it seems to reveal the image of how he knows I see Chinese kick-ass people. And then because it doesn't seem like something Luo Ji would actually do.
Yeah.
He's such a regular guy.
Yeah.
And then he turns into like a freaking kung fu silent master as he gives of his life away to do a stare off against an alien race, saying, "I'll kill us both. I'll fucking do it."
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's my favorite character in the series, and
Same.
That's one reason. It's not the only reason, but the way that that trope that Liu Cixin used for like his final stage of his arc was, I didn't see it coming, but it made total sense. I was a big fan, especially his death scene. That was very cool.
Yeah, I imagined it. Do you ever see like there's a George Clooney movie, The Perfect Storm?
I watched it and I fell asleep because I was really tired, and it was quite a dark film.
I can see why. But like at the end of it, George Clooney, like he gets the people he wants to out of the boat as like this gigantic storm that engulfs like his entire universe is coming to destroy him, and like his friend gets away. But he just says, "Nope, I'm going back into my boat, and this is the end for me. I'm okay with this." And that's why I saw Logi doing on Pluto, going, "Nope, I'm going back into my boat. This is the end for me. I'm okay with this." And like, I liked his like final words. I don't think I'm missing much. Like, cool, so cool. But yeah, he hands the sword, the switch that can allow the entire universe to know the location of us and of Trisolaria. He hands over to a woman who's kind and good, and unfortunately, because of that, she has the common sense not to kill two civilizations.
Yeah.
And the Trisolarians attack right away, I think, right?
Yeah, they've almost been like anticipating this happening, and they activate I guess we haven't talked about the Sophons. I think they use the Sophons right away. So this kind of remote control, crazy hard sci-fi, invisible to the human eye thing to just wreck everything on Earth. And even
they used droplets.
Droplets,
sure.
Right? Okay,
the droplets turned and like they were like, "Haha, got you!" Boom, smashed just everything we needed to protect ourselves, and
Yeah.
Yeah, if not for was it Zhang Beihai?
Zhang Beihai.
Zhang Beihai.
Yeah, Zhang.
Cool. Yeah, thanks to the humans that he saved out in the black, who've learned about the betrayal, both our locations got revealed, and the next step was just huge. Like, okay, and now I'm going to describe to you what civilization looks like when we don't live on Earth anymore. You're like, what? Yeah, the lessons of long-term thinking were amazing in this, and how like he took us on that journey. It reminds me of like I'm not sure where I saw it, but like China and the West have different takes on like the mythology of the flood, and how the flood for the West, it's we're hit by God. We better take it until He says it's over, and you just have to survive, which is kind of how Westerners kind of see tragedies. In China, on the other hand, I hear their story went as all the people just worked together over like generations, knowing that their generation's not going to see it in the flood, but they're going to start the means and processes of working the land and the sky itself to eventually grow themselves out of the flood through generations of work, which I thought was amazing. And yeah, through stacked generations of work and thought, but not enough thought, we put ourselves behind Jupiter to survive a supernova blast from the sun, which I love that idea, and I hope that Leo did enough research to know that that's actually a thing that could happen. Like, could we survive a nova behind Jupiter?
Oh, I have no idea.
But yeah, we takes us to the bunker era where humanity has left Earth. We create all these cool kick-ass space stations. One that will allow you to stand on the roof of it and just watch Europa, the moon, fly above your head. And just magnificent things. There's a thing that I've heard people have a problem with, like how men and women are portrayed in the book. Men are strong and women are. I don't think he's saying they're weak. I think he's saying that there's a kindness, and what I saw and like what I try to tell people is that like what I read wasn't a commentary of like what men and women are supposed to be. It was a commentary of like how we're the same, like how we will always need the balance and the cooperation of what we both see, what we see as masculine and feminine, to survive. Like you need kindness, you need vicious strength to keep going on. And it wasn't that the next sword holder, what's her name?
Cixin.
Cixin. Oh man, I've been saying that wrong. Is not that she's weak. She's got what should be, what I hope is the normal human heart of compassion. And she's not able to do the vicious thing that was needed. But yeah, she's just another reflection of like, which hopefully is in all of us. But then after that, she decides to kill the Lightspeed program, which dooms us all. And then, yeah, like that one chapter hits. Me and our friends love that chapter where Singer appears, because it's just a bunch of garbled crap. Like, you're like, wait, what sentence did I read here? Why does nothing make sense? And then, like, God bless their skill of writing. Like, it was just like a bunch of babbling, garbled nonsense that slowly crystallizes into the vision of, oh my God, another alien civilization. Oh my God. Oh, and then like they start using terms that you can translate yourself about, like, oh, this place has shadow corners. I'm like, like, I didn't see. No fiction does this, that except for Arthur C. Clarke, who did this in something, some other book, whatever. I can't remember, Children or something. But yeah, no book says, when I said I was going to kill all of humanity, I meant it. And he throws that two-dimensional foil at us, and it starts expanding, and like, yeah, the description of the destruction of our solar system, and no turning back. And like, I loved how much he seemed to know how in depth of science fiction I think, because like usually a writer like Arthur C. Clarke does the vanishing of the solar system and that's it, and there's not much more to think about. But like the 2D foil and like how it turned the solar system into a two-dimensional, beautiful, exact painting of what would happen if you two-dimensionalized all of our particles and everything about us. Then like I've always thought about this kind of thing actually. Like if you have infinity and like the superpowers of all of the universe, eventually some civilization is going to come across this and reconstitute it, right? Mm-hmm. And he's like he thought beyond my imagination. He's like, no, Keith, I thought of that. All you're seeing is radiation. It's vaporized, Keith. There's no coming back from this. I'm like, what? You even knew my daydream? Oh, crap. Oh, my God. It's all gone.
I think there's a few things in... there's so much going on in Death's End. It's probably impossible to catch it all trying to go by your memory. I guess there's a couple things we should talk about now so that we can use them for discussions later. One is the warnings that we get from Yun Tianming and his use of stories about paintings. How well do you remember those?
I have a hard time remembering them. And also, while I was trying to dig through several layers of like understanding the meaning, I didn't get it. Through conversation later with friends, I started understanding more. But I didn't get that was a warning, or why he would warn that such a thing like a 2D foil exists.
And I guess we should explain how the 2D foil comes about. So when the trisolarian droplets take out Earth, all of humanity's herded into Australia, and they basically have to live out like a dark age. That's one of the bits of the book where I was like, fucking hell. This is
when people start eating each other?
Yeah.
Like, holy shit, dude.
Yeah, it's so very dark. And I can't... This is the bit where I might need your help. How exactly the humans managed to get themselves out of that situation? Is Zhang Beihai manages to broadcast the location of the Trisolarian fleet, and then
I don't think it's Zhang Beihai.
It's not Zhang Beihai.
I think Zhang Beihai has been vaporized by that point.
Right.
It is another guy whose name I can't remember.
Yes.
Who it becomes the new leader of the fleet. They all do that hologram button where they're all voting yes or no, we're going to do this. And then that beautiful scene where it's one last vote that can say, all right, I'm doing this. And then like all these people just put their hand on top of his, so that's all these people together saying, we're all going to hell together. And they all press the button. And once that signal goes out, everything about Trisolaria and Earth and Australia, they're like, oh shit, it's over.
Yeah, because
it's over.
Yeah, because the fleet gets hit just as they basically prove the theory. I guess it's been proved correct before, but this time they prove it with lethal effect. They broadcast the location of the fleet, and that all of a sudden, somehow the fleet gets taken out by an unseen.
No. So like, what happens is like we broadcast the location of Trisolaria. The moment that happens, they bug out. They take their droplets and get the fuck out of our solar system altogether. They leave us alone. We're not sure if there's still Sophons here, but they're likely not, because they don't have they aren't as crazy as humans. They're pretty straightforward. They're like, the math happened here. This place is gone, obliterated in a moment of time. So now it's our time for us to take our two fleets and just turn out into the black and try to find another place. We don't know, like, one of the fleets gets destroyed. We don't know what by what though.
Right.
Like they ran across something that took them out.
Right.
But the other one survives to the end of the universe.
Yeah. Which we'll get to the very, very end as well later in the episode. So it seems like every one of these questions has the potential to go on forever. Here's another one that might do that. We've maybe touched on this a wee bit, but what were your expectations before picking up book 1? And were any of those expectations proven correct by the end of book 3, or had they all been completely blown out of the water?
Blown out of the water. I had no expectations going in. I expected to read something bland and boring, and the reason why it was so popular is because like it was science fiction that like normies could get, and
Right.
like my nose high in the air. So I expected to read something very boring and limited in imagination, so that it could just stay within the parameters of like how people normally see the universe. And then by Death's End, it was just like, yeah, it was like starting at the beginning of Mr. Miyagi teaching you how to sand the floor, and then by the end of it, I am the bride in Kill Bill.
Good answer. So here's another question which we've kind of touched on before, but it would be good to go all the way here. So the three-body problem, and in particular the dark forest theory. So the idea that it's kill or be killed in the universe, and that's because no any life that will be able to form can only guarantee its survival by taking out any other life it discovers. That's the that's the dark forest theory in a nutshell. And that became like a talking point in the Chinese business world. The tech and business world got very into three-body problem and tried to use it as a guide for economics and business and all these other sorts of things, regardless of how advisable that might be or not, and how much of a complete view of human nature it would be.
I've been unfortunately the book series unveiled for me the dark depths of human nature. Like, when there is a limit of resources, the only thing keeping us good is like the levels of thought that we've been taught. Like when it comes like what I've noticed a lot, like what politics and business now is that like they are on another dimensional level that we don't usually operate on, where if they don't do a certain thing of total elimination, then someone else will eliminate them. I don't think it's a good way to go about things on a humanitarian scale, but if you want to succeed, then yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's definitely, I think, like in my own country, in the UK, it certainly holds out. Where if you want to achieve something more than just absolute base greed, you still have to be operating on a kind of a cynical or highly compromised way of doing things. This is my own sort of lefty views here, colouring what I'm saying. But if you look at the last successful left-wing politician in the UK, it was Tony Blair, and he was a guy who was operating. What can I say? He wasn't an idealist. He might have been presenting himself as such, but he was much more like a Zhang Beihai than a Cheng Xin. He was. How can I say this? How can I express this?
I have a big word that I'm not sure if I'm going to use right, so I'm going to Google it first.
Like I guess like a highly pragmatic.
Boom! That's exactly the word I'm looking at.
Highly
pragmatism,
opportunistic. Yeah, and I guess I don't know what I think of trying to operate completely pragmatically. I was certainly not really raised to be pragmatic. I was raised to be very idealistic. So I think when you operate as kind of in a completely if you operate in a completely pragmatic frame of mind like Tony Blair, I think you do end up. It will lead you down very nasty paths, like when he led the UK into the Iraq War with the US, which he did not have to do, where like just the idea that being pragmatic is completely value free, it won't take you anywhere good or bad, it will just help you win. I don't think that's completely true, but I do think the odd splash of cold water waking you up from pure idealism is pretty healthy, and I think I got that from Three Body. I don't think I have nearly as dark a worldview as Liu Cixin, but I think reading the books gives me something I wouldn't otherwise have, because I'm kind of inclined in the other direction.
I want to be inclined in the other direction. My entire life has been idealistic, but from the lessons of the book and watching how the world has worked, like pragmatism, I think, is the dark path that leaders need to walk to get us to places where we can be ideal. Like, the pragmatism is the thing that'll get you through unstable eras. Like, when things are at their chaotic and evil is reigning, and, you know, like, the other side, whatever I consider the other side, like in my country of America, they don't give a shit about playing fair or giving up things because it's right or wrong. They're doing the things they can based on the rules that they are provided, and if they can bend them and break them, they will, and they do keep winning.
Yeah.
Versus the people on my side who work within logic, kindness, and as a result get punked hard by the rules that they don't want to be endorsing. So from what I've been able to see, like, yeah, you unfortunately, we want to get to the point where people like Cixin, yeah, we want to get to a point where people like her thrive and can lead our hearts to helping everyone. But to get there, sometimes you need, what was the white guy? Wade. Sometimes you need the
ruthless calculation.
I don't want that to be the truth. Like, that's not how I want the world to be. But it's true. Like, there are dark things, systems, people who work in ways that don't care about my idealism. And to get back to, like, where we can start really valuing being idealistic, you have to have pragmatism to sometimes work us through the worst parts.
Yeah, this is reminding me of something I meant to bring up earlier when we were talking about Cixin and her decision not to give up to not press the button, basically, to do the idealistic thing and refuse to destroy Earth and the TrChFic. So that I had a episode quite a way back now where we were looking at Vagabonds by Hao Jingfang, not anything by Liu Cixin, but my guest was Ken Leo. So I posted on the Facebook group that we met in, actually, the Three Body Facebook group. I said, Ken Leo's going to be on my podcast pretty soon. Does anyone have a question for him? And someone asked a question about Cixin, because it's so contentious among the readers and the fans and stuff. And I think Ken Leo he's quite a idealist himself, let's say. So his answer was interesting. He said, in his opinion, and he thinks, in Liu Cixin's opinion, the message that we should take from what Cixin did is that we should do the right thing even if it doesn't result in us winning. So things are right or wrong regardless of the consequences, which is a philosophical position, which would be the topic of a whole other podcast. But it's an interesting thing because, like, I think his point of view is it's a very wholesome one. There's a lot you can take away from it, and I didn't start an argument over that on the episode, but I thought about that over the next few days, and I was like, yeah, I'm not so sure. I probably lean a little bit more towards the consequentialist, the opposite position, where the consequences can make a thing right or wrong.
I want to be, the person I am and want to be the way I want the world to be. I agree with what he's saying. But if that leads to you, your loved ones, your family, your entire everything not existing anymore, then you don't get to go on to teach kindness and love and whatnot. Like, doing things that are right, even if that means your end and the obliteration of everything that you feel is right, like, then you don't get to have that grow more. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It's you're taking the future into account rather than just like an individual action.
Yeah.
Three
Body Problem fucked me up pretty bad.
Yeah, it's the thing. It's it's a really successful piece of like deep sci-fi because as well as being hard sci-fi and dealing with like loads of scientific concepts, it does, whether or not you agree with the moral positions it's taking, it at least gets you thinking about these really complicated well, more decisions that were made, moral dilemmas, but then you get, like we're doing now, it leads you pretty easily into thinking about like frameworks for evaluating whether something was right or wrong, without preaching at you too much, which is the sign of a job well done by the author.
Yeah, such as like the philosophy of the three body problem itself, like, and how much I've been noticing how the system is all everywhere. Like, you got two bodies, and then that creates a predictable system. You add one or more, all you do is add one more, and now you have an unpredictable system of destructive chaos. Which made me think about how our voting system works, like and like I think about it in like terms of like planetary orbits. So I used to be of the we need more than two parties. That's going to save the world. And then like I learned the math of like what the third party system does. The third party in ours doesn't really change up our orbit much as like the third party is a comet catcher. Does that make sense to you?
Can you explain that a bit more?
So, to make our solar system stable, and so Earth has a chance, we have Jupiter, which is a gigantic gravity well that attracts comets and other bombardment things. It absorbs attacks of like celestial bodies. And I think the third party that we have in our voting system, it absorbs math. It absorbs those votes. Like they create these secondary parties so that people throw away their votes, and it siphons away numbers away from the two big voting parties. So then you have two big systems that polarize each other and creates a stable system of being kind of gravitationally going back and forth, but stays in between and keeps us going further. So then, like, I guess what the danger could be is if you add a true third party to that voting system, then, like, if you have a fool like Trump can win, then who knows who could win? Like, if you add more actual viable options for humanity to choose, we chose a reality TV star because humanity, broad systems, we're not that smart and we like candy. So, like, yeah, all you have to do is add a true, actual murderous warmonger that offers enough people enough candy, and next thing you know, instead of us being mad at, like the three big things, like, instead of being mad about systemic racism and abortion, and that being, like, the only things we argue about over and over again, next thing we know, maybe we do stuff to have to worry about, like freaking organized murder rates. And yeah, like I just started thinking, like, because the three body problem system of how two bodies stabilize each other, add another element, and you don't know what could happen. Yeah, it's changed how I think about politics.
There's two things I'd say to that, and they've got nothing to do with three body. So I remember when I was like years ago when I was doing politics in school. One of the topics was the US, and I think the classes were fairly informal, and we're talking about like how, in some ways, how similar the US is to other Western democracies, but in other ways, how totally alien it is. And I think the teacher mentioned that there had been something like 5 US presidents who were actors in their career before they were politicians.
Yikes.
And now it's, which for all the problems
5?
of, maybe not 5, but it was multiple. Because I think I'd known that Ronald Reagan had been an actor before.
Yeah, he's the only one that I know of.
But
like, as a kid, he was actually just the spitting image of the perfect president, and
right.
I didn't know he was an actor.
Yeah. And now we have, in the States, there's a reality TV star, and in the UK, the guy we have, he may not be a TV star, but he is a clown with bright yellow hair, just like the US leader. But there's a really crazy example in Eastern Europe right now. Granted, this is something I heard through another podcast, so this is like third-hand information, but I'm pretty sure it's true. So the current president of Ukraine, before running for the presidency or for office or whatever, he starred in a TV show where he played the president. That's the age we live in now.
Yeah, as a kid, when Jesse the Body Ventura, a pro wrestler, won an election, that was my first hint that I was like, oh shit, all it takes is being famous.
Right.
Because like our society here in America, like television and celebrities, they really are something that I think we worship a little too hard because we see it every day. And why not vote for your favorite person versus thinking about country philosophy and potential growth of your civilization?
The other thing I was going to say, I'll try not to go on about this too long here because it's not related to sci-fi, about two-party and multi-party systems. So in the UK, it's an interesting one because in our national government, it is basically a two-party system, a red party and a blue party. But in all the other, so we have like all the different local levels, like councils, the European. Well, we did vote into the European Parliament, not anymore because of Brexit, and then the devolved government. So I'm in Scotland. I also have a vote for the Scottish government, it's kind of like the equivalent of a state government in the US, and they all use different voting systems. The votes are counted differently. And those systems they don't produce one party with a strong majority. So basically, they tend to produce multi-parties, which means that they need to form coalitions to get more than half the seats and be in charge. So we have that at every level, basically, except the main government in London. But in mainland Europe, it's the norm to have these proportional voting systems. So a lot of Europe is run with coalition governments, and no one really talks about it that much here in the UK. When we did have a party who proposed, we had a referendum, we had a vote on whether to change to a proportional system, and the argument against it was, well, no, we can't have coalition governments, they're awful, it will be the end of us. And we completely ignored the fact that all our neighbouring countries do it, and they're fine.
Okay.
But yeah, so in my idealistic mind, multi-party systems are the best. But then, if you look at pretty much the most multi-party representational voting system there ever was, it was 1920s and early 30s Germany, the Weimar Republic, which was one of the most. This is kind of coming back to three-body, one of the most idealistic democratic systems ever, and what ended up happening was 1/3 of the votes were going to the Nazis, 1/3 of the votes were going to the communists, and the remaining third of the votes went to all the other parties who actually didn't want to get rid of democracy. So the idealistic system destroyed itself, basically. And maybe
I was going to say that the long-term thinking. So multiple parties, maybe they are working for maybe a good several decades, maybe even a couple 100 years. But given enough time, you give it more chances to go crazier.
Yeah, well, I think a danger of it is to form. I know this happened in Sweden, I think. A party needed to get a majority, and the only way they could do it was by incorporating a far-right party. They needed a few seats, and they got them. So the far-right party didn't take over, but that's the kind of danger that system presents, is it can be exploited by fringes. It can become like kingmakers. We should probably keep going and talking about three-body, though, because we're getting very serious, and that's something I try to avoid. Right. Yeah, so I thought we could zoom in onto book 3, because that's the one that this episode is nominally about, is Death's End. So I guess we can skip the recap. We've basically already recapped the plot of Death's End. So I'll just ask you, why Well, am I right in thinking this one's your favorite in the series? Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, and so in that case, why is it your favorite?
Leo, he mentioned that his first two books he really was holding back because he's like me or any of us, like he's trying to reach to a big audience, and no big audience wants to see what happens if you get to a faraway star. They don't give that much crap about like your fission powered spaceships. So he always held back to keep it grounded, and then at the end he dazzles us with like wild sci-fi. The last book just was haymaker punches over and over again of wild sci-fi of like people finding dimensional fractures, allowing them to attack higher technological civilizations, and then like the giant freaking extra dimensional donut in the pond, the fourth dimensional pond. Then you get like that gigantic time jump where like the guy's like the next chapter, by the way, now we're like 18 billion years in the future. Like, holy shit, dude.
Yeah.
Like, and then like it was a short story like of a guy who threw himself into a black hole, and you get to see his imprint forever there, and just like two-dimensional foil. Like, yeah, it was just a bonanza of wild sci-fi in a way that I haven't been rocked in way too long. So it was just way more fun than the depression of the first book, and the second book was also a little too dry for me.
Yeah, and it kind of has like middle act syndrome, where it can't run on the steam of being the start, and it can't speed towards the end either.
Yeah. Even though like the second one had easily my favorite character, Lo Ji. Like I could connect with him the easiest and had the most fun with him. But yeah, that third book of haymaker punches of wild ideas and force fields and space stations and the end of the universe itself. Like, goddamn, man. Like, no science fiction writer has hit me that hard before. And I've read some weird people like Dan Simmons and his Hyperion Cantos, and Isaac Asimov with his Foundation. I've dabbled in Dune, had some fun there, but like, yeah, like another thing that I was trying to get from the destruction of Star Wars is like, are we out of new ideas? Really? Like, do we really have to just go over old ones? Is it over? And he was like, nope, I still got crazy, and someone else will build on his shoulders and be even crazier and make us think about new things. So yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was a similar experience for me. It was like, I kind of imagine if you took like an exponential line graph and then flipped it in its mirror image, so you just have a funnel that starts off thin, gets a bit thicker in book 2, and then book 3 it basically just becomes a vertical line. It's just a crazy acceleration in book 3. And I have a thought. Where is it going? I'm just going to pause and see if I can remember what I was going to say. Let me think. Oh yes, yeah, I remember. This has been on my mind a few times, and it was on my mind pretty much through reading the whole series. As soon as the terms like chaotic era and stable era started appearing, and especially when in book 1, Qin Shi Huang, the emperor who founded China's first dynasty, he gets like I don't know what you'd call it, a cameo. He appears in the virtual reality in book 1, and I took that as a message that we're saying something bigger here about. I got the feeling that he might be hinting that there are things in common between Chinese civilization and the Trisolarans, and whether that's true or not is kind of beside the point, because it set me thinking about what could the series be drawing onto things from Chinese history. So to tell anyone listening a little bit about my very awkward, inept entry into China when I moved there, I arrived about this time of year. Actually, I arrived at the start of the first week of October, which is a national holiday in China. They get a week off, And I was a stupid boy. I just spent a week, because I was in a small town, I had no idea where I was going. So I spent pretty much 7 days straight, alternating between trying to walk to the shops, so I was trying to remember where the shops were to buy like vegetables and rice. And then the rest of the time I was just reading one of the books I brought with me in my room, and it was China, a History by John Key. And I had pretty much no knowledge of Chinese history before that. And reading that book was kind of like reading Death's End, because it's just haymaker after haymaker of what the fuck, how many people died, what?
Oh wow!
And when things go well, oh my god, what? It was China was really doing this well, because maybe the education you get here in the West, you kind of just assume that because Europe and the West or whatever came out on top, that they'd always sort of been the top dog. I just sort of assumed that, stupidly, that like the Roman Empire, when it was at its best, no one could have possibly been doing as good. But reading that book, I learned that actually, through most of history, there were times when under Greek culture or the Roman Empire, Europe was doing well, but actually Persia and the Persian and the Chinese civilizations were often themselves like the most advanced in the world for long stretches. But the thing that really struck me about Chinese civilization is had soaring heights and absolutely horrific lows. Very like definitely, if you were looking for a word to describe them, like stable eras, chaotic eras. When things were stable, they went well, generally speaking. And when things were chaotic, there might be some like cultural fruitfulness, but the declines in everything were enormous. And I kept getting flashbacks to that reading Three Body. Not only Death's End, but especially Death's End, because some of the fluctuations, I think, get the most dramatic in that third book.
Yeah. I started thinking about like how Trisolaria is cut off from us. Like the book does a lot of how much we only get to hear a bit about them versus actually seeing their civilization and what's going on over there. And yeah, I came across some history as well, like saying how for a time, like, yeah, China was on top. And then also, I like telling this story, the mysterious Chinaman James.
Yes.
I was reading Death's End in a park, and I was just like, because I was just like all in, like the wildest shit was happening, and I'm just like, oh my god. And this guy was walking his bike, Asian. I'm pretty sure he's Taiwanese.
Right.
He didn't see what I was reading or the author of of what I was reading, but yeah, he just struck up conversation with me. I'm just like, yeah, you seem to be really into this book, and like I'm like, yeah, it's Chinese science fiction. I didn't know it was a thing, and I believe like I'm reading like multiple layers and lessons, and he's like, you're getting it, and it's like awesome. And then like we'd gotten this like big conversation about like civilizations and countries. Like he was like saying to me like, yeah, like do you still think the US is the number one in the world? You know, things change. I'm old enough to see like the time when the UK was the number one in the world, and like in my bubble of my universe that I've always existed in, like it's just never been a thing to think otherwise, that America's always been on top. And then he's like, yeah, but you guys don't notice it yet, but you've changed. And like I know that like a couple years ago, like a lot of friends on my social media, we all just expressed, does something feel different? Something feels off. And not many people could put their finger on it. I'm still thinking we're still trying to find our way there. But yeah, it's kind of interesting how blocked off my world has been from ever considering like that China may have ever been doing better than Rome itself, which, yeah, I still hardly ever think about. And it's hard to conceive that actually happened. But yeah, things change.
Yeah. My knowledge of like, or my knowledge of Chinese dynasties is it's okay now, but my ability to like say, for example, the Song Dynasty and the Southern Song Dynasty, that was quite a good time in China, and I could tell you about that. But if you ask me what was going on in Europe when the Song Dynasty was in China, I've not kind of memorized the historical parallels. But one that's really interesting I've talked on the show about before is the Tang Dynasty and Rome. That's an interesting thing to read into, because that was a time when there was a European power at its doing very well, if not at its peak, and the Tang Dynasty is generally considered to be the cultural peak that the Chinese Empire hit. So if you're able to find anything to read about that, that's a really interesting point of comparison. But there's it's endless, you can read on and on about it forever, and I've never got bored. It's a crazy, once you have an interest in something that you can keep following, like you said about looking for something to replace Star Wars, it's incredibly fulfilling.
As the father in Leo's first book, I'm not sure if that was his first, Ball Lightning, his father said, "The key to a happy life is a fascination in something."
There you go. That's exactly what I was trying to say.
Another thing Chinaman James pointed out, like, about the mystery of China itself, he's trying to tell me that there's a whole lot about China that we don't know. Like, there's just vast things that, like, one of the things he said was, like, there are things over there you think were magic. You have no idea. Like, yeah, he's like, yeah, do you guys still think you're number one? Like, you guys need to wake up, or else, yeah.
And just to be clear, when he walked up to you, had you met him before, or was he a total stranger?
Nope.
Right.
Total stranger. I'd gone through a breakup around then, and he kind of helped me out with that, with like some lessons about, like, he picked up my headphones. He was like, "See, these are heavy. Wait, no, not this. That grill over there. That's a heavy grill. You had great meals on it, but it doesn't work anymore. Yet you're still carrying it. It's okay to put it down." And, like, yeah, he just freaking philosophized me, and we talked about countries, civilizations, differences, and yeah, it was an amazing conversation, thanks to Death's End awakening me to different ways to ask different questions and how to see different civilizations.
And are you guys still in touch?
Not exactly. I'll be honest, he spooked me a little bit. Like it was just like the you got three-body problem, all these mysterious people and conspiracies and, like, giant civilizations, and out of nowhere, coincidentally, at the exact right time, this guy comes up and he just starts hitting me with all these, like, big ideas and philosophy. Like, I'm a little intimidated to look him up again.
Yeah,
I'm not even kidding. Like, it's in part because, like, he wowed me. I really admired him a lot. So I'm a little even, like, a version of starstruck by him. And then, like, worried about, like, trying to sit down with a stranger so we have another conversation that lives up to the one that we had. So, yeah, it's kind of hard to, like, yeah, I don't usually, hang out with people that I don't know. So, yeah, I have him on text. I sent him a text a while ago, and I was like, "Hey, how you doing?" He's like, yeah, just whenever you're free, we'll go for coffee sometime, he said to me, and that's the last I heard from him.
Right. Well, he's probably out there spreading his wisdom. Oh, there was something I was going to say. What was it? Give me a sec. I'm going to try and remember. Let's see. Oh yeah, no, I remember what it was. So what we were both saying that we felt there were, when we first when our kind of no, let me start again. So we were both saying that there was a point in our lives when we realized there was this whole other world we didn't know about, and maybe our own little kind of education and upbringing had blinkered us to certain parts of the world, and we've both had such we've both got so much out of talking to other people and learning about China and the wider world and so on. But a thing I've learned doing this podcast and learning about literary translation, actually, to and from Chinese, is that it's not the same for everyone in the world, especially in non-English speaking countries, and especially in a country like China, where its relationship with the Western world and the rest of the world is so key and kind of so fraught. And to some extent, I've had to explain this to Americans, where they'll try and explain something to America about me, and it's like, I already know that, because whose movies do you think I watch when I go to the cinema? The whole world consumes American pop culture, and me as someone from the UK, I have the benefit of being an English speaking person, and to some extent there's some UK pop culture the world consumes, and Chinese readers, the books that Chinese people read are, there's a huge proportion that are translated from English, but not just from English, from other languages. So if you have a chat with an educated Chinese person, although they're living in a country which has internet censorship, political censorship, blah 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 blah, in some ways they're going to be a better global citizen than you, because when they learn about the rest of the world, they'll have a very kind of global approach. They'll know lots about their own country, and they might think their own country is the best and so on, but they'll also have been subject to all the kind of hegemony of America or the English-speaking world. But they'll probably, if they've read a lot of books, they'll probably also have read stuff from French authors, Russian authors. So I found anytime when I've had a conversation with a Chinese person about, quote marks, countries, civilizations, cultures, it can be really good conversations, because we'll both have a lot to say, and we'll both have a lot to, it won't just be us parroting each other. There'll be a lot of, asymmetry in the view of the world that we have, and a lot of it clicks together. It's not the nightmare situation where there's no way you can possibly find a middle ground or agree. It can often be really nice conversations that you can have.
Cool. Huh. Yeah. The book brought to light how much I'm blocked off from everything not American.
Yeah.
And then also just like how it was yeah. I'm not sure where I'm going to go with that.
That's okay.
It brought to light how much I consume and only see, but then I guess a majority of my life I see a lot of Japanese stuff, but yeah, that's like, yeah, you don't think enough about what fiction you get is from pretty limited lanes of thought. That makes sense?
Sure, yeah. I think Japan's an interesting one, because that's a country, a non-English speaking country, that's successfully kind of exported its pop culture, and it's kind of unique in that way, I think, in some ways. Like,
I find like a lot of black people in America love it, and I have thought that one of the reasons why it's such a big deal to especially like young black kids is that it's the only other bit of entertainment we ever get that's not made by white people. Like, right. In our own country, like, if you're black, we're all American. But there's what I call what Cixin Liu, because I'm terrible at his name. He brought up something called dimensional awareness. Do you remember that?
Vaguely.
He wrote it in italics so that it seemed like I was like, whoa, wow. He seems like he really wants us to understand this concept. And dimensional awareness was that those people who found fractures that allowed them to see like four-dimensional space, and then once they went back to three-dimensional space, they had a different awareness of what's always there.
Right.
And to me, I think that is a good way to describe like the human experience, where you can go down certain lanes and get only certain influence, and like you can have like a simple life where you don't see the dimensional weirdness that you might understand if you crack open a Japanese manga that allows you to see the world from different angles and philosophies and ideas, that now you have a higher dimensional awareness of like things that are always there. And you can get this with anything, music, any kind of like influence from a culture. It cracks open more of the world for you so that you think about more. And therefore, like, the way I see, like, how black men are used in fiction, this nightmare horror story. But it's because I have that dimensional awareness. It's always there through my life experience. But if you don't see it, like, it's not because you're an asshole. It's because you weren't able to get that awareness. You don't see that dimension at all because it's just like, it's always there, but you don't have the experience to unlock it.
Yeah,
I just love that idea.
I think it is a tricky thing because in theory we could enjoy like media and culture from everyone and everywhere, but I think in reality we need some kind of initial spark or jump off point. So one reason it was kind of easy for me to jump into the world of Chinese sci-fi and Chinese fiction in general is because I lived in China. So I'm not saying that equips me with any kind of special knowledge, but it gives me the kick up the bum to go down that road that I wouldn't necessarily have for literature from other countries or whatever. And where was I going with that thought? I don't know. I guess I just want to. We've been going for about 2 hours now, so I want to ask you the last Death's End question, so we can go on to our next section. And I think it's a good time to ask this one now that we're getting more into kind of like now that we're opening up a bit more, because this is well, I've opened up about this quite a lot of times before, but movies can make me cry quite easily as an adult. As a kid, they didn't. As an adult, they do. Books, Same. It's very rare. Books can get me like that, but it doesn't happen very often. Chinese sci-fi has got me a few times, but it's mostly been the stories of this writer. I mentioned her before, Xia. She writes a lot of stuff that I don't know if it's supposed to be a tearjerker, but she writes a lot of stuff that can hit you in the feels really easily. So my question is, like, reading the Three Body trilogy, I found it mostly to be like kind of the cliche hard sci-fi, like it's very emotionally cold, the language used. Oh, this was the point I was going to make earlier. We should give credit to translators for helping us to access foreign cultures. But yeah, so the writing style, even though it's translated and written by Ken Liu, I think, and Joel Martinson, the guy who did the second book, they've mostly kept the language fairly plain, probably because that's Liu Cixin's style. He's not a flowery writer, and he's not usually trying to tug on your heartstrings. But there was a bit at the end of the book where, we mentioned this before, some civilizations make it all the way to the end of the universe, despite it being Liu Cixin's vision of the universe is extremely murderous, and it's a really fatal universe. But kind of comes about that two of our characters make it to the very end, and a screen appears that every surviving being will be seeing, and it's kind of, it gives you a rolling sort of credits of all the civilizations who made it to the end. And yeah, our two characters we have two human characters there, and they have a representative of the TrChFic who's living with them there at the end of the universe. And oh man, it's getting me even thinking about it. You see, like, humankind pops up on the screen at some point, and then because they're looking really hard for it because the things are going quite quickly, they spot humankind and they spot TrChFic, and they're like, God damn it, we made it to the end. And I was sitting there in my room on my own reading it, being like, oh my god, Liu Cixin got me. He made the water drops come out my eyes. So my question for you is, did the books get you like that at all at any point?
Not books. No book has. I don't think any book has made me cry yet. They hit me hard so that my brain starts like just flowing through like recalibrations and calculations. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like I didn't cry, but at the destruction of the solar system, I was kind of gone. Like, a good book can make me disappear so that I am lost in the ideas, implications, what it means, what it can mean to me and my life. And so, yeah, like, I didn't cry, but it took me away from my life. Like I disappeared is the best way of describing it. For a while, I disappeared, and I became one with the universe, and I just kind of thought about like ends, the beginnings, ends, the vast distance of like time and experience itself, and yeah, like the idea of when like that 2D foil hit the Earth and like it was encircled by gigantic snowflakes. Yeah, it didn't make me cry, but I was in awe. There you go. Like I had been searching for that, because like for me, like the new Star Wars, I keep going back to that. They have all the resources of humanity itself. Like I thought I was going to see the greatest piece of art I've ever seen that money could buy, and I saw nothing there. But then in my search for like where does creativity come from, it comes from crazy people. Like it's not something you create by committee. It is a strange, weird person who has had a unique life that can't help but blurt it out to everybody, and through them you start to see more of humanity and what we can become. And not to get all snooty and stuff, but yeah, that's the emotional explosion that hit me.
Yeah. I do kind of know what you mean about feeling disillusioned about the potential that Hollywood and the global movie making industry has in general, and what it actually gives us, where all the investments in it, it's not really about a story isn't a story. A story is IP, intellectual property.
Yeah, and, God, that hit me so hard.
Yeah, and creating...
When I noticed, like...
Yeah, sorry, what were you going to say?
I was going to say... Sorry, I cut you off. I apologize.
But no, it's fine.
What you mentioned about, like, how if it gets to a certain corporate level, it can become... it's a product. It's an IP. It's a product that some math people understand that if you do this certain thing, you'll get this number back, versus like there's like this YouTube series, SD Debris, I think is what he calls himself. I'm not sure why he calls it, but like there's a YouTube series talking about like the tumultuous path that it took to make Star Wars, and like George Lucas is a crazy person, but the creativity from there came from like a whole bunch of different people arguing, and it just coming down to finding something that was like special. And then you have, and like, they didn't, their money was on the line. There was work to be done. There's fears, there's chances, there's genuine creativity. But then like you look at the background of what the new Star Wars does, and they come off as in interviews, they come off as politicians. Like they talk in really distant terminologies, and some of them don't seem to understand like why people disliked them. And it was made through corporate decisions versus someone who loves the tapestry that you can create from a space opera. I think the first time I ever heard writing new stories that aren't sequels or prequels or spin-offs, I heard that described as IP generation, and I was like, oh no. What?
Yes.
Say that one more time?
IP generation. So if you write a new a script or a book or a film, which can then be turned into a franchise, you have you have not created a new story. You have generated IP, which can then be exploited by. Yikes. Yeah. That's. I'm not saying that's I don't think that would be any writer's mindset, but that's the corporate view of a new story. It's just a potential franchise. It's a potential generator of sequels and TV adaptations and this, that, and the other. And that's why we have what we get, or that's what we get. What we have. But
then there's the Three Body Problem universe that he did the Star Wars thing. He actually managed to do it where, versus say the Fifth Element. The problem I find with like the difference is Fifth Element, everything in that story, every science fiction thing is made to facilitate the one story. And once that one story is done, that's done. There's nothing about the Fifth Element universe that makes you go, I want to live there. There's other things I could do there, and other things could happen as a result of these things existing. It's all just a picture to tell that one story. But in Three Body Problem universe, you got a freaking odd universe that works whether you're there or not. Scales to our universe or your own life. And it's like a lot of puzzle pieces masterfully put together so that it builds a world picture versus just a story picture. And then Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, they have a world picture and a story picture.
There you go.
Versus just story picture.
So speaking of being a very intricate creation and a world and so on, and the kind of grand scale of things, I remember when we first got talking, you kind of laid out your theory as to what Liu Cixin was doing when he wrote this trilogy. Do you think you could describe that theory for the listeners? Because I think it's a really compelling interpretation, which I'd never quite heard before, and I think it'd be an interesting thing to talk about.
I think that he wanted to wake people up to the bigger game that can go on between all humans. He kept on saying in all of his interviews, he wanted to teach people about scale and what things can mean. So, if you have gigantic superpowers like America and China or something like that, or it's actually, and it scales from anywhere, like countries to political parties to you and your roommates even. He's trying to teach about the raw aspects of how we all interact together, and how when you experience a limit of resources, that there's always going to be some play at getting all those resources, and that you have to watch out for the manipulations that can happen to you on the path toward that conflict. Social media, I think, is analogous to the Sophons. Or the Sophons can drive you crazy. They can unwrap your eye and present images, and those can drive you crazy even to suicide. Where Facebook, I think I interacted with social media a little differently because of my obsession with internet interactions, and I start noticing patterns and why people do things and the cycle of how things work. But if you're not as obsessed with that, and you're not noticing the patterns, so my friends who interact on Facebook lately, I have two of them. They've deleted Facebook because the images put before them that are conjured by an algorithm, it drove them mad. They hated their lives more because of it. So I think he's trying to. There's a lot of warnings I thought that were in there about how messages get to you, who's sending them and why, and how the right order of them can hurt you. Versus and what you can do about it, which is taking a bigger step back, understanding the basics of why things are happening, and also knowing that some things, some scales, you're helpless to change. And that I think a good lesson in the books was that a lot of the people who are the most fortunate live normal lives. The people who lived within their own lifetimes, who didn't travel at the speed of light, they got to raise families and experience those joys, knowing that their lives would end. But then, I guess, I'm not sure those worlds had the additional fear of, all civilization ending. But, it was the people who stepped beyond and, travel through time and space. They seem to have lonelier lives, and they witnessed devastation versus the people who were in smaller lives. Well, they probably experienced their own personal devastations, because we all do. But yeah, it was the multi-layered lens of scaling of like existence that I saw in his books, which were warnings about like bigger systems, how those big systems don't give a fuck about you and might take you out if you say the wrong thing. And then like yeah, it so like when I look at my election now, once upon a time I saw a smaller scale. Like I saw hero versus villain, and I want my hero to win. But then you notice that if you take far enough step back, that hero is a part of a system of like millions of humans, and they're all playing a part in changing the course of humanity. So it's not so much Biden I'm voting for as much as a chance for all of the people that could take us in a more intellectual direction. So it's not just, yeah. Does that make sense? Did I just babble a lot, or did I say?
I think the general point you're making is it got you thinking in a more zoomed out scale. You were, like, if I was going to summarize everything you said into one sentence, that would be it. And I think, yeah, like I was saying that the series was for me kind of like a splash of cold water, like giving me a drop of like a more cynical view of reality that was a little bit of a medicine to my possibly slightly too idealistic view.
Same.
Yeah. And I guess also making me think about things at a larger scale. A thing that I've mentioned on the show before when I was doing episodes on Chinese sci-fi, but it's worth mentioning again because it's so relevant to what you were saying. So I got invited last year to a symposium on genre fiction from China, and we were really looking at was it crime? Yeah, crime and sci-fi. But we had some special guests who were more concerned with sci-fi. We had two authors, Xia Jia and Chen Qiufan, and most of the academics who were attending were more interested in Chinese sci-fi. And one of the guys who was there, he's called Nick Stember, and he's got quite a few kind of things he studies in Chinese literature, but one of them, things he's quite knowledgeable about, is sci-fi. But he told us an anecdote that wasn't specific to Chinese literature, but it was really interesting when you're thinking about three body. So he'd heard about this algorithm that, I don't know who made it, but there was an algorithm that was made, which basically you could, it was fed lots of different books. It was given all the texts of various books, and it was tasked with like looking for patterns. So things that were common between the writing of, like, it was, for example, it would be fed lots of crime and detective novels, and it would look for what all those novels had in common in their text. And then the same was done for sci-fi. And what it found in the case of crime and detective novels was the one thing they all had in common that the computer program was able to detect was lots of descriptions of rooms, so the descriptions of interior environments. And the one thing it was able to find in sci-fi that all the sci-fi books had in common was descriptions of scale. Very small scale and very large scale. And it's funny just how directly that applies to three bodies. So much of it, whether you're looking for it or not, whether it's apparent to you or not, so much of it is about scale, micro and macro.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it introduced me to thinking about the macro, like where you don't, like, and like it made things, let's see, yep, drink every time I bring up Star Wars.
Oh no.
It made me think about, like, how destruction creates new, and how adversity also creates something else. So, like, a lot of us, when we saw Last Jedi, we were like, shit, Star Wars is over. We lost everything. Like, they did everything against, like, what we loved about Star Wars. Luke is trash. It's on top of, is the biggest Star Wars stories that didn't make sense. None of the lore added up. It was just nonsense. And in its place, like, I have never seen the Star Wars, like, I've been a Star Wars fan all my entire life. I've never seen Star Wars fans care more about Star Wars than when it was destroyed. Like, there weren't this many lore. There's lore channels, streamers, reviewers. I've never seen people care about writing technique more. There's just like there was an explosion of channels that get millions of views of people who love like the top speed of a Star Destroyer, and then also like being a Star Wars fan. There are the books, the extended universe, which as a Star Wars fan you kind of chuckle to yourself. You go, ha, 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 I remember those books. Now they're revered. Like there's giant groups like dedicated to just like understanding that like yeah, there's stupid in there, but there's greatness. And like in Bao Shu's book, where he talks about the destruction of the 10-dimensional universe and how creating limits creates dimensional meaning in life. So yeah, like learning about like gigantic macro scales and what big changes can do down to the micro that maybe people down to their own scale don't notice have happened, and like how everything is always connected like that. It just makes the whole world that I like love and watching in the first place even more beautiful. So yeah, these books have changed me.
Awesome. So the next question I've got for you, it's also about theories. Have you come across other people's like theories that kind of try to explain what the Three-Body Trilogy is all about? And if you have, which parts of those theories have you agreed with, or do you found kind of matched your own theory? And are there any theories you've come across which you really just disagree with? You think it's someone really misunderstanding what it's all about?
Sadly, no. I really wish I could go deeper on this kind of. My problem that I've been running into, which you're helping me with, is like no one talks about it on the level that I'm thinking about it. Like when most people engage with it, they engage with it on like how Westerners normally do, like the first dimensional level, like the flat level of like it is an awesome science fiction book. Holy crap, that was amazing! Like destroy the solar system and like the distance and the troubles that causes. Most people, like when I go across like YouTubers who do reviews on it, that's where they stop. They think, oh, wow, dazzling astrophysics, and they stop there. And I think that I may have grown with a dimensional awareness that's a little different because, like, I've always loved Chinese philosophy. I've had the smallest connection to them through, like, as a young kid, I just digested goo gobs of kung fu movies, which don't necessarily come from China, from Hong Kong, but the philosophies and whatnot there. And then I think through being an anime fan or tokusatsu fan, you start just reading and looking at things just different enough that you end up seeing what's under the hood that other people who haven't spent a lifetime of caring about philosophy, astronomy, and Asian culture, they don't. I'm not smarter. I'm definitely not smarter than those people. But it's the dimensional awareness that I was talking about, like where through my path of life, I have life dimensional fractures that allow me to see things that other people might not, versus like how they have it. Like, well, the way I describe it, and the other way around, is like the dimensional awareness of music. Because like when I start talking about this, it can make it sound like I'm like I am so smart and so much better than other people. But when it comes to music, I am as one-dimensional as you can possibly get. I don't know anything about music. I don't know how it's made. I don't understand the talent or philosophies behind it. It's all neat, and all of it is stuff I can't do. So if I say, if I was told that Limp Bizkit is a bad band, I take other people's word for it because like it's beyond what I can think about.
Mm-hmm.
So I think like science fiction, if you've spent a lifetime in it, caring about philosophy and whatnot, then all of a sudden you get more dimensional layers because that's what you care about. And I don't think people have to care about it. Like, you go through life, you experience it, and you enjoy however you can and do. But yeah, I saw things that a lot of other people just weren't looking for, don't need to look for. So yeah, there weren't a lot of theories and stuff. And like I have a small group of friends, and we are just touching on like ideas and theories and whatnot. And we're only just scratching the surface because not all of us have read it yet. But yeah, that's the closest I come. And since we've all grew up within the same kind of dimensional path, like we're all on the same pages of like what we believe means what, such as like there's like a disagreement on the potential meaning of, I think, like in the fairy tales where there's like Prince of Deepwater, I think. Anyway, now I'm gonna get lost. But it was a disagreement on like, does the speed of light mean the distance of like human thought, or does it mean something else? So yeah, there's not enough conversation or not enough people who have experienced what I've experienced in life, so that we can all start theorizing on stuff. Yeah. What about you? How about you? Have you experienced some theories that you disagree with or you thought were awesome?
Yeah, it's a good question. Thanks for reversing the question on me. Yeah, I think so. The place we met was that Facebook group. I think Adam McMurtry, I think, set that group up. If I remember.
Yes,
right.
he did.
Yeah, and he's a former guest on the show. Actually, the other Liu Cixin episode we did, that was the one he was on. But yeah, I think the Facebook group, it's a nice place to talk to people, but the conversation, just by the nature of what Facebook is, it doesn't get very deep. It's kind of, and also like I think like a lot of Facebook groups, the topics tend to kind of cycle around. You get the same thing popping up again and again. But yeah, I'm trying to think like things I've read online about Three Body. There is a little bit of a limitation on what you can get. There's some really great articles about the Three Body problem available in English, but they're mostly looking at the kind of geopolitical context of like rising China, declining West, and the significance of the trilogy in that context, which is really interesting. But it's kind of the tendency that, especially when any discussion about China in Western media tends to get sucked into looking at politics, power, geopolitics, oppression, censorship, which is like, those are all really worthy and relevant and important topics, but they are a little bit like a black hole. Everything gravitates towards them, and other angles that you could analyze things from are kind of lost. So yeah, so those the theories about the whole thing being some kind of a metaphor for China versus the West, I think are very interesting, and you can read them lots of different ways. But the problem is those have a bit of a tendency to take over other ways of reading the series. Another
like how?
Oh well, it just once you start thinking in terms of like, is Liu Cixin, is he anti-Communist Party, is he anti-American? It's just that same tendency we're talking about, like in culture wars. Everything gets it consumes everything else, and everyone is forced into camp A or camp B. And it's unfortunately, this is where if you're trying to talk to Chinese readers about the book, some of them will want to talk to you about politics, but others are so used to hearing the stereotypical Westerner saying the same stereotypical mean things, quote unquote, about their country, it can poison your conversation from the start. So I can see that. Yeah, so I'm always careful on the podcast if I want to talk about that stuff.
There's an interesting path of thought on that, where like I was able to see like the idea of like it being a warning to the West, East versus West, but like there's a thing about it that made me think that it's like a prism that if you turn it some, you can still see other ways of seeing it, such as like it might be too simple and to think of it as East versus West versus individuals versus giant systems. It's like because like in the metaphor, and from what I've seen, like how groups kind of talk about themselves, it sounds like the fans of Three Body Problem are the ETO. But if you're part of the ETO, then you're trying to work toward the system destroying us. So could the ETO be maybe a metaphor for wanting better, and you're just trying to bring that to your own world, and the danger and devastation is the macro of how country systems work against their civilians sometimes.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a lot of dimensional ways of looking at it and worth looking at it.
That actually leads me to the other interesting discussions on ways of thinking about the series that I've seen. So I was saying before how I was wondering as I was reading it how much it's informed by Chinese history, either ancient or recent. And if you think about the ETO, they're a radical sort of organization. They have very negative beliefs about the state of humanity. And you can kind of see similar organizations, in other parts of the three-body problem, other movements, other movements in the series who have kind of a strong or radical belief, which tends to be objectively wrong. They tend to be doing something. They have very strong beliefs, but they're completely contrary to what humanity should be doing. You can see groups like that in other stories by Liu Cixin. For example, in The Wandering Earth, there are groups of people who think that Earth shouldn't be trying to escape from the dying sun, that it's all a hoax. They're a lot like climate change deniers. And you can see other groups like that in Chinese history, like the Cultural Revolution. That was kind of, what would you call it, like Maoist radicalism to the furthest extreme it could possibly be pushed. And it was incredibly destructive for China. You can read a great deal about just how much was lost during that period because of lots of things caused it, but what it was it was an attempt to go as far left as you possibly can, destroy the past, get rid of anything that contradicts the ruling doctrine or whatever. And I think a really big reason why China, although still being ruled by the Communist Party, kind of shifted towards a capitalist model or a less ideological communist model was after the Cultural Revolution. It was just so obvious that that period had been so destructive. It had left like a very sour taste on people's tongues, so to speak. It kind of poisoned the idea of radical visions of making the world a better place, I think, for a lot of people. And Liu Cixin was a boy when that was going on. So a thing that I find interesting is trying to guess like how has domestic Chinese politics and history informed his stories. And you can only really theorize because you can only guess what's going on in his head. But yeah, I enjoy reading those theories based on not international politics, but domestic Chinese politics and history. But again, it's still politics. It still reduces a sci-fi story to a boring, sort of human struggle story. So I would try not to let that view of the story completely encompass everything. But yeah, the other things I was going to say about discussion of the trilogy, there's a couple things that kind of stop us getting a full discussion. And one is that a lot of the really interesting stuff written about Chinese literature in English is academic. So you can only access it if you're with a university or a library and you have academic access. Or if the journals that publish the stuff make it open access and free. And even if it's still free, you still need to know where to look for it. So that's one problem, that a lot of the best discussion about Chinese lit is in the academic world, not in the popular sphere. And another problem is just the problem of languages. Not a lot of the most interesting stuff about Three Body will obviously have been written in Chinese and not translated. And that could be articles in websites and newspapers and whatnot, or it could be bloggers and book reviewers. There's a really good Chinese site called Douban, which has it's like Chinese IMDb, it's Chinese Goodreads, and you can find loads of amazing book reviews on Douban, but they're all in Chinese. So my Chinese level is not good enough to even read a book review. So if I want to know what Chinese readers think of a book, I'll go on Douban and use the auto-translate feature, which obviously is far from perfect. But yeah, I think a lot of the most interesting thoughts about Three Body are shut off from you if your Chinese reading level isn't good enough to read them.
Yeah, I was thinking, I was kind of hoping that maybe, like with Japan, a fan community would start to arise where we just start just getting goo-gobs of like their fiction fan subbed for us. A beautiful thing that I noticed when like how I noticed that the people in Geeks of China of Three Body Problem want us to know, like they want us to get into it, how they see it. When like I was just like I was getting that feeling while I was reading the book, like how there's like some imagery and whatnot in there that seem to line up with like Western science fiction, and also if you're a Japanese science fiction geek, we're just kind of like, it's kind of like he's using like signals so that I tune into, his message, and like only people who are into this can maybe get it on that level. So I started doing searches for like, so if he's influencing this many people, like who else is out there that might want to also share this? And that's when I found My Three Body, the remake of Three Body Problem Saga in Minecraft, and then eventually it turns into a CGI online series. And any TV series, they have to try to live up to that. That is a hard act to follow. That stuff has probably made me cry. That has taken away my heart, and the thing that I found most beautiful about it, which just made me so thankful, is that it was subtitled in English.
Right.
And yeah, that they did that was like, oh, holy shit, they aren't just making it for themselves. They want all of us in on this, or all of us that can read English at least. But yeah, that blew me away that they cared enough to put English subtitles on it. And like, there's another connection of like, what kind of geek are you, nudge nudge, was in the My Three Body. I was reading, there's like, if you watch on the Chinese Bilibili site, you can see...
Bilibili, though. I have very happy memories of using Bilibili when I was inside China. It's cool. I wasn't expecting you to hear those words, but that's awesome.
Three Body Problem took me down the well, man.
Yeah.
So I just started doing searches and stuff, and so I found the link, and then like I wanted more, and that led me to some link that I found. I was like, Billy, what's this? And I was like, oh my god, this is like another YouTube of just creation. And then like something that I haven't seen on YouTube, like you can click a thing so that you see fan commentary as it's going. Yeah. And like there's someone that Tokusatsu is basically what the West knows mostly as Power Rangers, but with like Japanese actors and stuff like that. And then there's like a sister show called Kamen Rider, where you have one hero who transforms into a guy who fights monsters. And like, they have their own associated sound effects. So one of the guys, a guy named Kamen Rider Fies, he dials on his phone where he goes, doo, 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 standing by, and he goes, Henshin. And he transforms. In the My Three Body series, like there's just like a small part where like they're taking Logi into like an elevator, and like someone dialed something and they use a sound effect from Kamen Rider. I'm just like, oh my god, we're both Kamen Rider fans too. I'm like, I feel like I'm here with like an alien family who like I didn't know exists, and like we're all connected. This is so beautiful. So like, yeah, I loved how their emergent fan community is reaching out to the West so that we all get in on the fun.
Yeah, I think I mentioned before how much young people in China are into like Japanese pop culture, and it's a weird thing because that is something that is to some extent young people in China have in common with young people in the West. There's a really interesting difference though. Like my memories of being like a teenager was that the kids in my school who liked things like anime and manga were, to put it politely, the biggest nerds. And they were a very small group. There's probably less of them in Scotland than like the proportion of like anime and manga kids where I grew up in Scotland. I would imagine is probably lower than the proportion in like in your average high school in the US. So yeah, it was a small. Ouch. I think so. I think it might be very different now, but it was like a very
Now-
small sort of niche thing that the nerdy kids shamelessly enjoyed. Good for them. Whereas in China, it's a lot. I think it is. It depends to what extent you're into it, but the impression I got was that it's a lot more normal as a young Chinese person to be into that sort of stuff. It's maybe like, I don't know, like Marvel or sci-fi over here. It is a subculture, but it's a subculture that if you enjoy it, you're not a stranger. You're not a weirdo. Basically, it's
Cool.
It's normal over there, and they'll
You still there?
Japanese. Yeah, I'm still here. Can you hear me?
Oh yeah, there's like a hiccup in our audio. But
Oh, right.
Cool.
Yeah, so it was a thing I never saw coming, and realized it's another example of like it's almost the same and yet it's slightly different. The way that Japanese stuff is consumed in China. Yeah.
There's a flipping around the questions and stuff. I don't think I got to hear from you. How did you get into Three Body Problem? What led you
Good
there?
question. I remember hearing what the odd thing, and I remember there was an article I read. So after I'd heard the name and I was like, I need to know more about this. There was an article on some, I think, newspaper's website, but I don't remember which one. But it described the plot summary, and that hooked me. The premise of the story is what hooked me. There was a slight catch because the premise that really interested me, and I know now what a small section of the book this is. It was the bit where the article said, so the aliens are coming for the humans, but they can't get across the universe in the blink of an eye. They'll arrive in 500 years. So mankind has to collectively get its act together and has 500 years to get ready. And that was what got me. The idea of that story, but from a Chinese perspective, really captured my imagination. But of course, the catch is that doesn't happen in the first book. That's book 2. So I devoured book 1, waiting for the 500-year catch up. Got to the end and was like, oh, right, okay. The thing I was really reading for is not here yet. I have to keep going. So then I picked up book 2. But yeah, I think that hooked me, and also the fact it's a saving the world story, but all the main characters are Chinese. And here's where me not being American gives me a little bit of qualification to say it can be a wee bitty tiresome to constantly be watching these blockbusters and stories where humanity comes together to save the world, but it's a humanity where like 80% of the cast are American, and they're just naturally happen to be in charge. I remember I used as an example in a previous episode the Halo video games, which are about humanity working together, but everyone is either a white American or like a minority American. And there's only in one of the Halo games where they really try to go for an international cast. But that it's the exception and not the rule. So I was interested to see that being flipped. Because the interesting thing about Three Body is there is a bit of lip service to having an international cast. Like, there are American characters, there are Russian characters. The Western characters are generally assholes, which is fair enough. But it's a flipped over version of the America Save the World story. So that caught my interest too, but probably less so than the basic premise of 500 years to save the world. But that's just one little cool thing about the whole series. There's so much more to it than that.
Yeah, it's refreshing to finally see gigantic scale stories not from American Western point of view. And like I said, I think that's why the young of America love anime so much.
Right.
We finally ever get to see gigantic epic scale stories that aren't about how the white guy or white woman saved the universe again and again and again. It's just a different prism of like finding other people and like other ways of thinking about things. I think we all need so that we can all grow.
Yeah.
I say in my sincerity, but sounds cliche way.
Yeah, well, I think I've said it once or twice on the show, and it's half as a joke, half serious. But if there's one thing I want to do for the podcast, apart from make myself incredibly rich and famous, it's stop the world nuking itself. So that's an overdramatic statement, but like the truth is we live in a really interconnected world, and we're living in a world where it looks like in our lifetimes we're going to move from well, like in my parents' lifetime, the world had two superpowers. In my lifetime, it's had one, and in all likelihood, we're going to move into a future in the coming decades where the word in the geopolitics is multipolar. So we're going to have not one place or one country that's dominant, not even two, but probably several. So we're going to be living, like we were talking about multi-party democracies, it's going to be more unstable, and we're going to probably be more and more interconnected. And if we can't get along, and if we can't understand each other, we'll be stuck in a dark forest situation, which is not a situation that really ends well for anyone. But, yeah.
I think this is a fine idea, and I hope it works. And I almost feel like that's part of the reason for the book, even. Like, it hits so interestingly to so many different kinds of people. And so many different people, like people who don't read science fiction are reading it. I don't know. I do think that might be part of his point, to try to get people connected on something that's universal, like how we all should care about the cosmos. Because the cosmos, to me, is like that astrophysics and science. It's like real life magic that happens every day that we all should be in awe of, and kind of find connection through. So that's why I love this stuff.
Absolutely. So we're getting on to the final sections of our wee chat here, and feel free to flip this one back on me. So my first question is, actually no, sorry, before I ask you a question, I'm going to do our word of the day. So in every episode I try and think of like a Chinese word with some kind of relevance to what we've been talking about. And I got one here. I had to look this one up, and I think it's the right synonym, the right variation of the right translation of the word. So the word I wanted to translate was warning, and after consulting with my dictionary and whatnot, the word I got in Chinese was Jǐnggào. So Jǐnggào, warning, that's our word of the day, because at least from one point of view, there Three Body is a book full of warnings, be it warnings just from fiction or warnings about things in our own real world. But yeah, word of the day aside, here's a question for you, and I try and do these in every episode. If Death's End, so Death's End specifically, was a drink, what kind of drink do you think it would be? It could be a soft drink or alcoholic. Man.
Alcoholic.
Yeah, definitely.
There's the Long Island iced tea of science fiction. Like, in Madison, we have a unfortunate massive drinking culture here. But we have our fun with it. And there's a bar that serves we call them real things, and you get a gigantic jar. And then, like, when they mix up those Long Island iced teas, they put all manner of, like, heavy-hitting shit in there, all in one stir together. And, like, with that one jar, you're in for a good night with your friends. That's Death's End. Like, he pours in the heavy-hitting philosophy, crazy sci-fi, emotional heavy-hitting, and as a result of it, like, me and my friends are having the most fun talking about fiction since Star Wars or Lord of the Rings. Like, we haven't had this much fun with a book or fiction since this book. So it's a Long Island iced tea. What about you?
Perfect.
How do you see it?
I was going to say something similar. So stupidly I didn't think of this in advance, but off the top of my head, also something large and dark. So I was thinking of like a porter. So it's a beer, but it's probably going to be not very fizzy. It's going to be very heavy, very dark, very bitter, and it's not something you can knock back quickly. I mean, I suppose that doesn't quite work, because you can power through Death's End pretty fast if it's gripping you, but you'll be digesting a lot of stuff, and you will need to lie down for a while afterwards. A lot, like if you drank a porter.
I'll go back to my Long Island iced tea metaphor, where it's delicious. It can go down very fast, but the more you drink, the more harshly drunk you'll get, so you might want to pace yourself.
Yeah. I think we did a good job there.
Cool.
Right. Okay, so a further reading question now. I think we could probably both recommend Redemption of Time, or aka Three Body X by Bao Shu. Shall we talk briefly about that? Because I feel like it's in some ways it's a companion piece to the whole trilogy, but I think also it's kind of a companion piece to Death's End. I haven't I've done a bonus episode on Patreon on this book, not on the main feed, but I did learn a few things about it. So basically, Bao Shu was a huge three-body nerd. He was studying in Belgium when Death's End came out. It was obviously out in Chinese first. He wanted to read it ASAP, and just so he could, a bit like when the Harry Potter books were coming out, some people were trying to read them in one night. So he had no way to get it quickly, so a friend either photographed or scanned every single page, sent it to him. Yeah.
Nerd!
He devoured it really quickly, and then he was aware that a lot of people were going to write their fan fiction sequels for this book, and how he wanted to write one too, and how the way the world of media works, it's not necessarily about how good the thing you write is, but also how do you get it out ahead of all the other ones. So he wrote it really quickly because he was aware if he didn't write the first good one, someone else would, and his would be buried. So his choice to be speedy proved correct. He's ended up writing what's been approved by Liu Cixin as like the official authorized sequel or fan sequel. So that's how the book came about. Can you describe to the listeners what it is about? Well, I guess we don't want to spoil too much.
We should, or
we could maybe.
I guess we've been spoiling.
Yeah.
We spoiled so much so far. If someone's listening to this, this should be an end game podcast where you do this to digest, not to get spoiled. Because, don't ruin the fun for yourself. The third book to me is he calls it a paraquel. Love that word. You find out that Tianming survived, and a god being grants him pretty much unlimited power, so that he flies across the universe to find out why the universe is the shape that it is, and then eventually get revenge for humanity. So I consider this to be canon-ish. Like, there's some things that I don't hold to the original trilogy. One thing that I do, and that is Tianming's realization that he's inside a trisolarian ship. He looks up because it can see through dimensions. He looks through the ships, and they're a bunch of larvae. They're a bunch of small bug larva people, and they're not what we would consider people. They're larvae. Mm-hmm. And that blew my mind, because, I've been begging for fiction to do this forever. Every time we have our science fiction, any aliens we run into are human-based, basically.
Yeah, they're get a lot of scale, usually.
Yeah, exactly, especially that, on our scale. Versus, me, I keep on thinking, wait, if we have something the size of the universe, why aren't there planet-sized beings? So I've always had this idea that Jupiter itself was maybe an alien, and that's why its red spots always pointed in our direction, because that's actually an eye.
No, don't say that.
And yeah, it's an eye, and God. We're the only thing in the solar system worth looking at. But sorry,
I'll have nightmares for tonight, and then I'll be over it. Don't worry.
But yeah, you do know the red spot, it stays where it is. It's always pointing toward us.
I might have known that and then forgotten, but now I know. Damn.
But yeah, so now we get larva aliens that can build civilizations and spaceships. Freaking love that idea. But the idea that one of us gets to become a god being and actually take down the civilization that took us down, no, I don't want that. That is way too superhero, straightforward, and righteous, and I don't want that. I love the careless unfairness of how we got taken out. by someone who, was just cleaning up their basement, basically. He saw us as bugs and cleaned us out. And I like that. I don't want the superhero version of one of his like, we'll go get them, or wait. Yeah, he helps humanity get back at that. Even specifically the guy, specifically the specific alien that took us out, we get back at him. But by the end of it, we find out that God created a perfect 10-dimensional universe where all things happened at the same time. There's no distance, and I love the explanation that infinity is the same as nothing, and that death creates dimensionality. Where if you have something, what I've always wanted, I want immortality. I want infinity.
Yeah.
But then you find out that he's like, no, like if you already have like, you want a strawberry from another galaxy, if you can have it like that, that's almost the same as not having it at all. You have all options at one time. But if you shatter the universe, that people are spread apart and have to work to get anything, now you've created meaning. And I love that idea, and it almost makes me wonder about if that's a message at all, but like how the powers that create our societies, if that's part of why there's so much limitations on resources, money, and whatnot to create meaning.
Yeah.
But yeah.
You might find this interesting. So I mentioned earlier, just earlier today, I was in that Zoom gathering of the London Chinese Sci-Fi group, and it was all about, well, Bao Shu was there, and we were talking about one of his short stories. And the short story, you can read it in English on the Clark's World website. It's called Lighthouse Girl, and it's basically. Do you know about the jellyfish that can live forever? Have you heard about that before?
I've heard of them.
Yeah. So basically, the premise is, I won't spoil it, but using science fictional techniques, someone's life has been extended in theory forever using something from this jellyfish. So it's about like a human lifespan and potential immortality. And after we've kind of had a general discussion about the story, we can ask the author some questions. So my question for Bao Shu was, you're famous for writing stories that mess about with time, but this story is not about time. And I was about to go on and say, but it is about lifespan. Do you think lifespan and time are deeply connected? But before I could get to that, he said, no, it really is about time. And I was like, oh, you just finished off my question for me. And he said, yeah, I always write about time, even when my stories aren't directly about time. It's what I'm doing. And he explained his background is philosophy. So when he was at university, he was studying philosophy, and he was looking at this philosopher, Heidegger. I don't know Heidegger very well, but I think his ideas were focused on like human subjectivity. So I think the idea of Bao Shu was, he explained when he was answering my question that the only way we can really understand time, and the only way time really exists, is through our perception. So so ideas about like immortality and time, for him, you can't separate the mortality and immortality, and you as a being that exists in time, they can't be separated. And that's a lot of what Redemption of Time is about, I guess, for at least.
Cool.
So yeah,
I go back and forth between hoping that someday I can talk to Bao Shu and never ever seeing his face ever. I like my distance from my gods. It's really fun, but then if you talk to your gods, you find out they're just people. They're geeks. They're just people, and then it takes away from some of the grandeur and the magic of it.
Yeah, that's the thing. You can be when you boil yourself and your thoughts down into an essay or a story, that's your mind at its best. But when you're a living, walking person having a chat, you can't always be as smart as your smartest writing. And yeah.
So yeah, like throughout this conversation, there's the constant flipping coin of should I ask if I can join the group? Can I talk to Bao Shu? Is he on Facebook?
I don't know if he's on Facebook, but you can definitely join the group. What they do. I'm talking to listeners here as well. They have a mailing list and also a WeChat group and a Twitter, and every month they have a meeting and they just send out like a Zoom invite link. And once you have the invite link, you can join. It's not an exclusive club at all.
Cool.
And
I'll very likely join.
Sweet. I'll put links to the relevant places in the show notes. Yeah, that's got us onto our final question. Are you reading anything just now?
Yeah, actually. Baoshu and Cixin Leo, that'll always mess up. You guys reminded me of my love of books. There's a thing in books that movies have such a hard time matching, and that's really taking me away to another world. So, through him, I went through the Dune audiobooks, which was an experience in of itself. I learned more about humanity and philosophy. Also using the Dune Club with Comic Book Girl 13. I'd recommend, if you're going to be reading Dune, go to Comic Book Girl 13 on YouTube, use her book club. It'll help you digest the philosophy that's all over in Dune. And then recently, I was like, hey, let me check on, back in the day when I was a kid, where I was just consuming books and, religiously. I was like, hey, let me look in on, my favorite authors of back in the day. A guy named Douglas Hill and William Slater. And just to see, I guess, now that I don't have to worry about the library finding the book and I can just get anything in a snap of a finger, see how they ended up. What do they end up writing? And my buddy, my author, Douglas Hill, who wrote some of the greatest space opera I've ever read, kind of turned into a crazy person. And that's been kind of interesting to read. Then the last book that I got is House of Stairs by a guy named William Slater. Through Common Writer, I got involved with the people who made an American adaptation of a Common Writer TV show called Kamen Rider Dragon Knight. And then it was just so fortunate. And so much fun. And the main writer behind it is a guy named Nathan Long, who I also very much admire. And I posted up how I like this book called Interstellar Pig by William Slater. And my other favorite author, Nathan Long from Kamen Rider Dragon Knight, he's like, hey Keith, maybe you should check this out. This book made me. So I'm going to be diving into House of Stairs to see what this book did to influence Nathan. And then lastly, I love the world of John Carter. So I've been starting the first John Carter book to get back into that, and that's reminding me of the bad motherfucker tough guy barbarian books that I used to read with the Conan books, and now it's an intergalactic barbarian. This is amazing. So yeah, I got reintroduced. The books reintroduced me to my love of books. So that's been a lot of fun.
Awesome. Yeah.
What about you? What are you reading?
Oh, good question. I'm reading a collection of short stories right now, and the author is American, although he is Chinese American. It's Ted Chiang, and the book is Exhalation. There's two reasons why I ended up reading Ted Chiang. One is the way I first heard of him was the movie Arrival. Did you see anything about that movie, or did you watch the film?
Yeah, I saw it.
Yeah.
It was fantastic.
So that's based on a Ted Chiang short story.
Oh,
so that's how I first heard his name. But I've also heard him. He seems to be popular with Chinese sci-fi writers. I'm guessing that's because he's available in translation in Chinese, and maybe just the benefit of having a Chinese name makes him interesting to the sci-fi fans of China. I don't know, but yeah, he's really fantastic, and he came up. Me and another guest on a previous episode used one of his articles. He wrote an article on BuzzFeed about AI. We used that as a starting point for a conversation. But now I'm reading an actual book by him, and it's really good.
I would love to know his thoughts on AI, because I've been thinking about that a lot lately.
Yeah, I can send you the link, but there's that book Exhalation has it's got quite a pretty long short story in it called The Life Cycle of Software Objects, and it's about like kind of like virtual e-pets. It's kind of like it's got weird parallels with Animal Crossing, I think, although I've never played Animal Crossing, so I don't know what I'm talking about. But yeah, that's what I'm reading. But yeah, what you were saying about Three Body getting you back into books, that's a little bit true for me in a similar way. So I've always been a reader, but when I was a teenager, I was reading books from the what was then called the teen fiction shelf at my local bookshop. I guess it would now be called YA. But the books I was reading were pretty much all sci-fi and fantasy. Maybe a little bit of some other stuff too, but mostly that. And then when I started reading like generic books, adult books, I kind of moved in a more sort of realist direction. I didn't really read anything that was just genre fiction, and I've kind of gradually come back to it. Like in towards the end of university, I read all the Game of Thrones books, and then I read them again in China because I really wanted to revisit them. But yeah, I've now kind of become more and more interested in sci-fi thanks to Three Body. It kind of again kind of pinged me. So it's this Chinese genre inspired by a Western genre, and it's pinged me into reading more kind of English language sci-fi as well. So yeah, that's how it's affected me. Not completely different from the way it's affected you.
So yeah, like the death of Star Wars started me thinking about like how it's not brand names that I love, and sent me on my quest to figuring out and remembering why I love this kind of stuff. And Three Body Problem was a masterclass in why I love this kind of fiction. And it was kind of almost a geek rebirth, actually, through Three Body Problem and God Bless It, Stargate, which me and my friends put off watching for decades. But yeah, together, just remembering like the love of like new ideas and exploration and pushing beyond what world you normally see. Three Body Problem was a blessing.
Yeah, I think it's. I'm glad that you managed to get free of like the world of consuming fiction as brands. I feel like we're kind of pushed more and more to do that, and it might work for companies trying to make money and produce stuff efficiently, but I think it comes to a point where it doesn't work for us as consumers. It has to
How
be
much
a story.
it taught me, like the best thing that New Star Wars taught me was that it's not about the brand name. Like what you've been following, what you've been loving all this time has not been a brand name. It's creative people, and that's what you need to follow. Is a lesson learned back in the day when I was reading comic books. Like, I thought I was a Wolverine and X-Men fan until my favorite writers left. And then it just turned into garbage. And then, like, I was like, oh, so then, like, I'd read the new stuff that they wrote or find new writers. And then, like, I'd be in love again and found that, nope, I am not in love with X-Men or Wolverine. I'm in love with stories. And
that's really deep.
Creative writers. Yeah.
That's pretty deep, yeah.
All right. Thank you once again for having me on. This is take two. I love being real about it. Yeah, like we're actually recording like the ending of this like a couple days later. I forget like my format that exists in the podcast world. So we can go over where you can find us on the internet. So Angus, where can we find you on the internet?
Okay, well, since this is the second time, this should be nice and concise. So the podcast is hosted on Podbean, and the URL is TrChFic.podbean.com. That is TrChFic, because that stands for the Translated Chinese Fiction Podcast. Just stick those words into Google. You also probably can't go too wrong. You can find all the different places that you can get the show. Social media-wise, there's two good places you can go. There's the podcast's official Instagram account, that is at TrChFic, so TrChFic, and I just use my own kind of Twitter for the show as well, and that's at Angus Likes Words, and it's a little bit more holistic there. I generally will tweet about China-related stuff, if not literature. But yeah, that's pretty much all the places you can get me and my show.
Cool. All right. You can find his podcast and my podcast, this podcast, on the Couch Command podcast, where we're hosted at popgeeks.com. We'll be making sure that we have all of his links in our show notes. And yeah, thanks for joining us. You can find me at Keith Justice on Instagram, where I post about anime and other things of dorkness. So anyway, yeah, thanks again. I had a great time. I never get to be this pretentious, so it was fantastic. Angus, I look forward to talking to you again. Take it easy, man.
Yeah, and I hope it's just as pretentious next time as well. So yeah, until then, see ya.
Rock on.
There we go. How good was that? I'm sure some of you people were crazy enough to listen to the whole 3 odd hours we did there. Yeah, I think we've done all the plugs already, so what else is there to say apart from I will try to get as many of those show note links in that I promised throughout my interview with Keith. If I've missed anything, just chase me up on the social media. So there's the Discord, the Instagram, the Twitter. All the links will be in the show notes down below. The homepage, remember, is TrChFic, TrChFic.podbean.com. We're really looking forward to hearing back from people. I've been dancing around doing Three Body Problem for so long, and now we've finally done it with a fan of the books, which is exactly the right person you'd want, I think. So yeah, adios, 再见。